the issue of financing organizations. In general, I think that over time, there will probably be one option that all organizations will come to. Not because someone will force them, but simply because it will turn out to be more effective. But nevertheless, at some stage, several different variants may coexist, that is, several types of organizations that exist, although according to similar principles, but still somewhat different. First of all, an organization can be financed from a budget of various levels, that is, it can be the budget of the whole world, or the whole country there, or one entrance. Secondly, this organization can act as a contractor on piecework payment, well, or on a permanent payment, but still its services are ordered. Thirdly, it may be some kind of public organization that exists on donations from volunteers. There are no contradictions between these options. They are all united by the fact that within these organizations, the funds allocated to them are distributed using direct democracy, that is, direct voting with full openness, with arguments, delegation, and in general, with everything that I have already listed before. That is, if this organization, for example, is budgetary, a certain amount of money is allocated to it from the budget. Every month, for example, and it has already been agreed within the organization how this amount of money will be distributed. In particular, they agree either in advance or, in fact, what to do if there was not enough money in the budget and she was given less. Well, or vice versa, they gave more for some special merits. Here's how to distribute this case internally. If this organization works on piecework payment, the analog of this budget money for them is the payment received from the customer. But they do not agree exactly in the same way, that is, with the help of direct democracy, in advance or not in advance. Then how they will agree within themselves. But nevertheless, there is no one person, and there is a small group of people who distributes all this money. Well, you don't have to repeat it with donations, it's exactly the same situation there. In what often people think, that if this information is opened, then squabbles will immediately begin in the team, and in general, the bosses know better who is worthy of what they're. Let the bosses decide. And not the technical superiors, but even the financial ones are better. In other words, there is a director, and around him, there is some kind of financial structure, such as a finance ministry, and so they decide what they deserve. Naturally, if an organization has some kind of owner, then the owner will decide. Well, because he's an owner too, he knows better. But these fools, they will immediately transfer the entire budget to their salary, and the organization will close next month. Oddly enough, the experiments that have already been set, including my friends, have been tried at their own companies. So, they all tried, and for some reason, it turned out that these fears, they somehow are not particularly confirmed. That is, for some reason, employees suddenly realize that you can't spend all the money on a salary right away. In other words, it is necessary that something else remains for the renewal of funds. It is necessary that something else remains for development. And in the end, the organization buys raw materials in the production process, for example. And it is also necessary to leave some money for this. But the number of suspicions has radically decreased. That is, if before that people thought that these financial decision makers were hiding something from them, then in this case, everyone already understands what kind of turnover the organization has, why exactly so much was spent on salary, and not more and not less. They understand what to expect at all. In general, confidence in the future is such a considerable bonus. That is, it is clear that, probably, there will be people who will decide that it is better to let them give me all the money now, and next month, I will find another job. But for most people, of course, this is not an option. In other words, they would like to work in the organization for quite a long time, perhaps decades there, if they, in principle, like what the organization and the established team are doing. Therefore, of course, they are not very comfortable thinking that I do not know whether the organization will close next month or not. When they get access to all the financial information, they have much less doubts. And the most important thing is that when suddenly some kind of crisis comes, people can already consciously decide that let's somehow temporarily tighten up and not close down, for example. In other words, people feel much calmer and much more confident. Well, here, I made a reservation that there should not be an explicit guide at all. Let me explain a little what is meant. That is, now there is a strict hierarchy of subordination in organizations. A superior boss is more important than everyone who is under him. And if these people are included in his branch of subordination, then he is the king and God for them. In practice, of course, it rarely happens that way. We have to negotiate with employees because slavery has already been abolished, and valuable employees, they still have their own opinion, and if they do not listen to it, they can leave. But anyway, officially it seems like this. It is assumed here that there is no such thing anymore. In other words, if some employees perform some of the roles that management currently performs, they perform them only from a technical point of view. So we need to make some appointments. Well, we will allocate an employee who will notify everyone about the time of the meeting, but he is not the boss, he is not in charge. He cannot order. The decision about the meeting is made by direct democracy, and the employee only performs a technical function. To have a task in the calendar there, and keep an up-to-date list of subscribers to this calendar, that is, so that everyone gets everything on time. Or if someone has a question there, he, as a person who is engaged in coordination, can answer it. Well, exactly the question of the meeting. At the same time, they, of course, cannot order anyone. If for some reason, the team has decided that this time is inconvenient for them, the coordinator cannot say, "But you must." The time will be rescheduled. If some individual people have decided that I will not participate in this meeting, the coordinators can remind them as much as possible, and as much as possible ask why. Still, they will have a showdown with the team. Is this attitude normal or not? But not to the coordinator. It may seem that, but how will the issues be solved in general? Yes, they are normally solved this way. You know, these experiments, they even showed that in some cases the budget and work schedule of the organization turns out better than with the traditional hierarchy. Maybe it happens worse once, but I've never had a chance to get acquainted with this. All the time, for some reason, it turns out better. I suspect that it can get worse when everyone's motivation is at zero, but here, and with the hierarchy, this case will last a couple of weeks, maybe a month. After that, everything will fall apart anyway. And it is quite possible that it was the leadership that brought it to such a moral decline. And it is not quite possible, but most often it happens. By the way, you can try to work out with your friends somehow. The first times will not work, but their times from the fifth, it will already be quite confident to get there. All this planning, all this coordination, is not such a complicated thing. Most of the things people do at work take a lot longer to learn than this thing here. Anyway, let's move on from, let's say, algorithmic questions to, let's say, interface questions. A lot has already been said about how it works logically, how it works from the point of view of the user, that is, any person, who naturally enters into a whole group of all kinds of advice. From the council of the whole world to the council of his entrance, from the council for the entire industry in which he works, to the council of his 5-person circle, where they play, I do not know, Counter-Strike. It is clear that this system cannot be organized in person. Well, I hypothetically assume that it can be done somehow, but it will cost a lot of effort, and not only at the time of construction, but also at the time of use, at every moment of use. These face-to-face meetings, these explicit votes, they generally do not transfer very well to the described system, where voting is in fact permanent, that is, it always goes on. You can change your mind at any time. In general, there are a lot of difficulties. In other words, this system exists entirely in computers, or to be more precise, in computers connected to a certain network, most likely the Internet. In other words, there is a certain system. In this system, there is everything for voting, asking questions, discussing this case, calculating some correlations, statistics, and so on and so on. The user runs this program on any of his devices. For simplicity, we can assume that this is some kind of website, but I'll explain later that it's still not really a website. But nevertheless, here he opened this website, or opened a program, he has a list of questions there. His question is what he can carry there. To do this, he does not need to do anything special. He just, in fact, starts at the level at which he wants to raise this question. Another vote describes the essence of the problem there, gives some possible options, yes, how it can be solved. And this, by the way, is not necessary. He can generally offer one option, and the second option is me against it. That is, you don't have to do it. Then the question he started gets into this very system, where it will be visible to everyone who can make a decision at this level. That is, in fact, to everyone to whom this decision applies. These people, accordingly, can read this case and tick the box opposite the option they like. If they didn't do it, but one of their delegates did, but it looks like they have a tick, but let's say a different color. That is, that you kind of voted, but not yourself. You can respond there and see how this body was calculated, through which delegates. Moreover, in the case when the voting is open, and let me remind you, it is always open for delegates, then you can also look at others. How did it happen that this delegate's voice is exactly like this? He did not vote himself, but his delegate voted like this, and like that. So his voice was temporarily drawn in this form. Then people tick these boxes at the moment when a certain quorum is reached, that is, the minimum that is needed for this decision to be made, in any form at all. A certain period begins, I conditionally call the deadline. That is, after the quorum was dialed, the report went. In a month, the option that won the majority of votes will be implemented. Well, or, the option to do nothing is implemented, which, however, is implemented by default, if the majority voted for this option. In other words, we are not changing anything on this issue. The same thing, of course, happens if the food is not lying. It just means that as it was, so it remains. But this vote is hanging. That is, at any moment, anyone can join it and express their opinion. When the deadline ends, the decision is considered to have entered into force. Naturally, there are some notifications coming to everyone in the process but such a decision has a countdown, a deadline. Such a moment will come. You can vote until that moment. Well, interestingly, after this moment, as already mentioned, they can also vote. When the deadline came out, the solution begins to be implemented. That is, some forces and resources are already beginning to be spent on it. But this does not mean that this decision is final. If after the deadline, the majority votes in such a way that another option wins, but alas, we spent resources, we can be considered wasted, but fortunately, we caught on in time. That is, either the implementation will stop altogether if we decide that the project as a whole is bad. It does not correspond to our desires. Or another option will be implemented. That is, they decided that the project itself is good, they just did not guess with the version in which form it should be implemented. Naturally, since each person participates in a whole bunch of these very tips, if he is shown all the questions that any person has started, it is quite possible that something that we conditionally call a news feed will be so cluttered that he will not be able to isolate anything useful in it. In other words, it is clear that some kind of customizable filter should be screwed to this news feed. Naturally, he can find any question in the system itself. But let's just say, on the agenda, a person can say show me only those issues for which, say, more than 10% of the participants voted. And the rest, if I want to, I'll look, and without that I don't need to show them to me. What's the point? Since we have a delegation system, these 10% of participants can be recruited through delegates. In other words, not many people voted physically, but some influential delegates voted in quotation marks, that is, those who represent a large number of people, and these 10% were recruited. Someone may ask, but how will the first people see this question at all? Well, that is, before he scored 10%, how will these 10% be scored? If he is lying there somewhere in the depths of the system, no one sees him. Then even the delegates will find out about him from nowhere to vote. Here, I must say that this is quite a standard system. In order to arouse interest in something, a person should not just write it down in a notebook, somewhere at home, but there is such an interesting thing. Should he make any efforts to popularize this issue after all? I do not know, to write articles, to speak somewhere in my YouTube program at least, to talk to someone personally. By any means, he must attract the first interested. And these are just the first interested ones, and will gain 10%. It is clear that he will not be able to notify everyone personally at all, most likely, but everyone else will see this case in the tape after that, and vice versa. If a person does not want to popularize his question in any way, the question is, why should everyone else be interested in this, even if he is not interested? Maybe this is not an important question. Maybe this person has some kind of mental insanity, or there is an obsession with something. Why would people show his proposal at all in such a scenario? And yes, it encourages many people to really look for arguments, to really write some articles, to really prove that the question they raised is a necessary and important question, and not some kind of their personal whim. But at the same time, you can do some clever trick. For example, some kind of setting, with the help of which a person chooses how many of these questions to show him in the feed, which did not get enough votes to pass under the filter conditions. For example, it costs like this. Show me one such question. Here, he is randomly selected for everyone and is shown to him once a day. No matter how many questions were asked that day, he would see one. In other words, this is such a random popularization, yes, with small forces, but at the same time without spam, because it is clear that one question a day will not create a mess in the feed. And if someone is strong in spirit, but he can put himself 10 or 100, in principle, he can disable the filter altogether and put show me all the questions. If he's so comfortable and so funny, he's right. In other words, this system does not impose, it just helps people in this way. And thus solves the question, but what about spamming the agenda? Well, that's how it should be with her actually. Spam questions, they simply won't get on the agenda for most people if they don't get enough votes from some other sources. In addition, a person can connect some other filters. That is, for example, regardless of how many people have already voted, show me questions from my friends. But friends are some people whose opinion he is interested in. It seems to me, for example, that some person offers very sound ideas. I don't want to miss any of his ideas. So for him, I turn off this filter, at a minimum of those who voted. I bring in his friends and say, always show me his initiatives. The same thing may include some other criteria. For example, show me the proposal of my delegates. Or show me the offer of such an organization. Well, that is, groups of friends. It can be conditionally called as follows. You can come up with a whole bunch of options. If I've missed something now, you can always add it later. In principle, this will not change anything, and is implemented quite easily. I emphasize once again, because for some reason, it is not always understood from the first time. This is not disabling the ability to vote. This is exactly what filtering the news feed is. You can vote on any issue at any time. It always lies in quotation marks in the database. Here it has been started, it is already there. If you go to his page in quotes, you can put a check mark there at any time. One more nuance. I said earlier that voting is just putting a certain tick in front of the option you like. This is the simplest version. In fact, in practice, we will very often encounter a situation where, in principle, a person likes several options. There's just a group of options that he likes, and there's a group of options that he doesn't like. That is, in theory, it would be cool for a person to put down many ticks, not one. From the interface point of view, this can be implemented as follows. We have a certain line, from which there are options that, for example, do not suit me, and above which there are those that suit me. Under the line and above the line, I place these options and sort them out. In other words, I say that in general, I would like such and such an option to win, but if he didn't win, in principle I don't agree to this one. Why is this important? Because otherwise, there may also be a loss of representativeness. I chose option. Option won a minority of votes, but my vote was for option. That is, for option B, which in principle also suits me. My vote did not go. And because of this, option B won. Well, because besides me there were other people who probably also welcomed option A, and option B was considered not bad. He's just worse than a, but that doesn't mean he's bad. Whatever happens, in most cases, it should probably be possible to vote for many options at once. And in fact, just divide the options into those that you like and those that you don't like. There is no problem with counting votes here. There are ways in which it is not contradictory to get out of this situation and come to a predictable, intuitive choice in any case. Well, let me remind you again. In addition to the fact that a person ticks the boxes, he can rearrange these boxes later. If he suddenly realized that option B is actually not as good as it seemed, he can uncheck this box at any time. And even if some other people take off the ticks from option A, option B will no longer receive his voice. All of this, again, may be related to some kind of notification system when he receives messages. You know, we chose option A, and he won, but now they have unchecked him, and you still have other options marked there, you double-check. Next to the place where you can place the priority boxes above or below the line, you can probably see the statistics. That is how they have already voted, and how they voted, let's say, in history. Well, because they're in 10 or 15 years, it may be quite interesting to see how public opinion has changed. Also, in general, very important information. So, in addition to this information, some other information should be provided. Something like a discussion of the issue. In other words, there are some people who want to make arguments. In addition to a general chat, articles can be posted there. But again, you're going to say now that it's going to be spam. A bunch of idiots are posting something there. Well, we can always keep filters, show only articles that have a lot of likes, or only articles from friends, or something like that. With the availability of all other articles, you can always choose only those that you want to see, that seem meaningful to you. However, this is all tied to the question and its history. In other words, you can see not just a complete list of articles, but also at what point which article was added, and also filter it out there somehow. In other words, this was when the question was raised, this was at the time of its discussion, this is during the deadline, this is after the deadline has expired. These articles were before the opinion changed, but here's something like that. This is useful, both in terms of statistics and in terms of restoring, let's say, the historical process. If someone has a question, why did we change our mind then? He can always look, why did we change our minds then? And perhaps, to find a mistake there, and prove that they changed their minds in vain. Or, on the contrary, to find the mistake of yourself, and understand that you changed your mind completely correctly. This process is not new for people in general. In a number of areas, the advantage of scientific and engineering, it goes on constantly. There are scientific journals, they post some articles that form a point of view. Some arguments are written in the articles. However, the point of view may change, and in principle, it can be tracked by those articles that were published at one time or another. In general, filters on friends, delegates, some commissions, specialists that this person personally likes, or likes those whom he personally trusts, they solve the problem with spam, and at the same time do not allow you to lose something. Again, let me remind you, do not think that if specialists do not have some kind of monopoly right to make decisions, then they cannot be consulted. Please, this council, that is, the whole set of people making decisions, can decide within themselves that we need some kind of commission that will sort it out. This commission will sort it out. We will post its report in a prominent place next to the question posed. Everyone will be able to read it. There may be several such commissions, because some group, for example, does not trust this commission, but another group trusts it. Well, all right, we'll agree on how many people should trust the commission in order for it to get into a special place. Well, in quotes, in an expert opinion. But this is not an order, this is exactly what the conclusion is. This is information that people can draw conclusions from. Regardless of whether a person trusts the commission or not, he has the opportunity to read its conclusions and make a decision based on the arguments that this commission has given. Well, or based on some other of his rights. Here, in fact, such a narrative part is probably already ending, and there are such more disparate questions. I didn't really sort these questions, that is, they go in any order, They are according to the degree of importance. But nevertheless, I will answer some of them, and if someone comes up with some more during this time, you can write a chat. I will also answer them. The first question of this plan is, what about the army, the police, and similar structures? Because in the minds of people, these structures cannot exist without hierarchy in any way. As for all kinds of police, it generally existed on a completely democratic basis in a lot of places, and often worked even better than the police or the police in some dictatorial state. Well, where in fact, it does not help the people, but the dictator or the monarch. That is, maybe from the point of view of the order and achievement of the goal, it works well. Only the monarch and dictator set these goals, not the people. And the people would like to have others at all. So, if it suddenly turns out that this does not work at all, then you will have to decide what to do. But so far there is no such information. There is evidence that it does not work well when no one else can. And that's it. For now, that's it. We recall the principle that everything under direct democracy works according to the principles of direct democracy. Any organization, including, of course, the army, the police, the courts, anything at all. Moreover, it works literally according to the same principles. If we say that the coordinators or some performers in the state are employees of the entire population, exactly the same thing happens here. There is no minister who stands over the population. Any person in this hierarchy, if there is one, and in my opinion, there should not be one at all, he is an employee, respectively, society. In other words, society should know everything about his work and be able to remove it at any time. We can always evaluate the skill, but when we hire an employee, or even hire an employee to do some work for us, we check his qualifications. Here too we can check it, but not at all fix it for life, and at the will of some other employee. Well, because it's not the whole population in general that produces it, right? It's some individual people who make them. These individuals are very few in comparison with the entire population. It is far from a fact that the population agrees with their assessment of professionalism or dedication there, and so on. In other words, these structures are naturally preserved to some extent. Well, I really hope that the armies will disappear over time, and humanity will unite. But until that happens, these structures are preserved in some form. But not in the one that is now. Just a certain organization. Let them be conditionally called state, but subordinated not to an abstract state, under which the name usually hides a small group of people, but to the whole society. In other words, the whole society, first of all, sees all the information, and secondly, makes all decisions, including appointing some performers. They are either coordinators or officers, or specialists who make some plans. Anyway, specialists make them up, and the decision is made by society. The next question that is immediately asked when people hear it all, but what about secrecy? But the vile enemies, they will find out all our plans because of this openness. And there the criminals will find out all the plans about how they are going to be caught, and will immediately take some action. Therefore, secrecy is needed. And what kind of secrecy can there be if everything is open to the whole society? There may also be spies among them. So, I will say that according to historical experience, in almost all cases, all of these are here. Secrecy is needed now because there is a war going on. They are not needed at all in order to hide something from strangers. And of course, they also hide it from strangers. But this global state of affairs is necessary in order to hide from their own. And not something there, but something that is personally beneficial to me, or something that is not personally beneficial to me. If others find out, and an excuse is constantly being made up for this case. In other words, if there is a war going on now, it is sufficient to introduce this state of things, then I assure you, it will always go on. It will never end. That is, oh, now you know. Now the hot phase is over, but the enemy continues to sharpen his claws. Yes, he continues to look at our side. We have a Cold War now. We are now having an information war. We are now having some kind of war, a secret, behind-the-scenes war of opinions. Anything. Look at any sect, at any dictatorial regime. Make sure that their war never ends. Plus, in an atmosphere of secrecy, you can hide all your mercantile dealings, all papples, all abuses of power. Yes, here we are sending soldiers to build a dacha for me, the general, right? And when someone asks where these soldiers went, we say, and this is secret, it's none of your business. Someone found out that the soldiers went from the soldiers, and we say, why are they giving out a state secret? And you don't know that. They built this dacha, and it was a secret early detection station. We just didn't tell them, we have secrecy. And they fools thought that this was a dacha, and there was no way to check it. Why would these people believe like this by default? I don't mean specifically that generals are bad. I mean, there may well be a crook in the place of this general. Why should we believe him without checking? Judicial abuses, investigative abuses, all sorts of things like police arbitrariness, all sorts of papples, corruption. Everything happens under the stamp of secrecy. At the same time, there are really spies, and they always know just that. In other words, if you want something not to be recognized, do not tell anyone about it. Well, or at most, tell 2 or 3 people who will also not tell anyone but you. Because if they also have 2 or 3 other people, it will disperse very quickly. That is, if you have a circle of 3 friends here, okay, you discuss something with each other, everyone keeps a secret. This is your secret, but no one will force you to give her away. No system. Another thing is that, when there is an organization that receives a big share from the budget, which has some powers, they are even possessed, I do not know, by the person who monitors the gas supply system. He also has power. That is, if he does something wrong, the whole entrance can blow up. It's not a bad consequence, is it? And imagine, he hides from everyone what he's doing there. How do we know what? Maybe his hands are growing from the wrong place. Maybe he bought a diploma. Maybe he's even sent just these very razons. And he's fine, you can't ask him anything. In other words, the answer is this: there is no need for this secrecy. If someone has a brilliant plan in their head, for its implementation, this plan will still have to be told to someone. That is, while it is maturing in his head, he can keep a secret. Then, in any case, he will be forced to give it away. So, it's better to let this secret be printed in an explicit video. The enemies will find out anyway, and we will become stronger due to the fact that we will also know what is happening. And to get rid of all these scammers, crooks and corrupt officials, as well as idiots by the way, in time. And of course, we will consciously accept these plans and not just receive them from somewhere above. It is possible to define some kind of sphere of critical cases when there is simply no time to do it, or it is impossible for technical reasons. But this is comparable to the fact that, there is a surgeon doing an operation, a patient is under anesthesia, and, I do not know, there is some kind of vessel ruptured. It wasn't even the surgeon's fault, but simply because, well, there were some thinned walls there. Here the surgeon cannot ask the patient how it is. That is, he quickly repairs this vessel somehow, finishes the operation, and after that, the patients are informed. An analog of something like this may exist. With an instant report, I note, immediately after this case was completed. But all the rest of the time, the doctor, I remind you, is obliged to inform the patient and get permission from him for any of his actions in relation to this patient. Here is the same situation. For some special cases, we can say that yes, an employee has the right to make a decision if some special conditions have been fulfilled. Well, I do not know. There, the bandit pointed a gun at the policeman, opened fire. Here, yes, he has no time to ask the policeman, that is, the entire population, what to do. But on this occasion, he is obliged, as by the way, and now, to write a detailed report. But unlike now, this report does not end up on his boss's desk, but in public access. Everyone has the opportunity to see what happened there and draw conclusions. It's the same with ships. Everyone has the right not to read the conclusion, but not only to see how the process is going, he also has the right to choose these very experts who are leading the meeting. I'm not going to say unequivocally now. It's not fully thought out who makes the decision on court cases, whether the judge or the general population. However, it is clear that it is necessary to think in the direction of the population as a whole. In other words, the judge, in a sense, is a technical worker who simply coordinates the process. He can make his recommendations, well, by analogy with a jury trial, again in those places where he normally works. Yes, they are where the jury is needed just to create an entourage, but the decisions are made by them. Well, in this case, not 12 people, but actually the entire population. It is clear that technically it is sometimes difficult to implement, because there may be 100 or 500 cases, but again, the delegates decide. They have delegated votes, and it is at the expense of these votes that they make a decision. But if people suddenly decide that the process is going somewhere wrong in some case, they have the right to vote themselves, and guilty and not guilty, and for what consequences it should have. In particular, they have the opportunity, after looking at some case, at how the process was going there, what the technical worker, the judge did there, they can decide that there is not. Perhaps I will take my voice from him. He can no longer act on my behalf. That's how it's supposed to work. It may seem to some that it can't work that way, but look at those countries where law enforcement agencies, at least their top, are elected. So, I'll sum it up again. All organizations are governed by direct democracy, and information about their activities is entirely open. Decisions are made by the entire population, at least those decisions that relate to the interaction of the population with this organization. Inside, they can do anything there if they do not go beyond the limits of restrictions. There are no bosses standing over society. There are only hired coordinators, and there is no need to be afraid of information leaks, because secrecy harms the population much more than it helps, and it helps the enemies much more than it harms. There may be technical temporary secrecy, but only in pre-agreed cases, of which there are very few, and only temporary. And this time is very short, not as it is now classified, but for 50 years. No, it was classified there for a month. After that, all the information either gets into the public domain, or we begin legal prosecution of those who did not do it. Holding the appropriate position, hid something like that. Further questions are somehow related to this. Won't there be a mess? In principle, it has already been discussed there many times in the course of the presentation. But nevertheless, I will clarify once again. People reason like this. That's when there is a vertical, there is responsibility. Responsibility is generally a great word. It's very serious and solid, but it doesn't really mean anything. It means that, in case of something, in case of a jam, the higher self will suffer especially badly. The lower authorities will suffer weaker and so on. In fact, I do not know where you find such organizations, yes, in which this is done. I personally have not seen any of them. All the organizations that I have seen, grassroots workers suffer the most in them. The higher the boss, the less likely it is that he will somehow fall under the distribution at all. That is, as a maximum, with a golden parachute, they will be transferred to some other job. Well, the minister has stolen here. Well, let's have him be a minister there now. That's about how responsibility works in most cases. Someone will say, but how about some officials were shot there under Stalin, and they were shot in China? Well, it's a cool responsibility. But excuse me, but how many people were shot at that time? Well, that is normal. Yes, they shot 1,000 major officials and 800,000 of all the others. Is this the norm of the ratio? That is, exactly do they have responsibility? No, well, I can say yes. There are probably fewer officials there, as a percentage of the population. That is, they have a higher percentage of those who fell under the distribution, but there is still something too much. Here we must also remember that with all such showdowns, they are often shot or planted there. They didn't allow any extraordinary shoals compared to everyone else. No, they just crossed the road to some other equally big people, and people took advantage of a formal reason to eliminate competitors. And they themselves may have done the same thing. That is, there really is some risk in such a system, but usually this means that everyone else has it very, very bad, too. In quieter systems, everything is turned upside down there. And yes, the bigger a person is in the hierarchy, the less vulnerable he is. Less, not more. That's what the word responsibility means in practice, although it sounds very solid for some people. But nevertheless, people reason. There is this very responsibility. It is expressed in the fact that there is a hierarchy of subordination, and that's when the real order comes. Because the director said there, he will check there, in which case someone will be fired there. He said something to the deputy. Deputies are afraid of dismissal. They told the deputies there. And they will check it too. In fact, of course, no one checks anything, but people think so. That everyone there is keeping their finger on the pulse. Everything works like clockwork there. In practice, I say it works like clockwork only where grassroots workers are interested in their work. But nevertheless, we are cleaning up this case, and after that it will not fall down, because everyone will blow their own pipe. Yes, they can't agree in any way, and that's it. Everything will stop working. Well, I'm sorry. Of course, we have fewer such examples than hierarchical systems, but less only in the sense that we have fewer officially. That is, where this was directly enshrined in all the statutes and so on. But in practice, we have more such examples than hierarchical ones. That is, in practice, often indeed, an enterprise, some organization works due to the fact that employees negotiate themselves, and the hierarchy simply does not interfere with them enough so that it all breaks down. Here again, do not think that the hierarchy will be guaranteed to interfere. In some cases, there really is a good specialist in the role of the boss, who generally helps a lot. But the problem is that this specialist, this is his role, it distracts from what he is most useful in. In other words, in these consultations, in participating in the development, in some kind of building, let's say, the architecture of the solution, he is most useful. But instead he is engaged in a bunch of some kind of economic bureaucratic activity in which, well, in principle, a computer would cope with it, but nevertheless, he has intellectual and physical resources for this, and at the same time, it still spoils his character. Because copper pipes, yes, are serious tests. But nevertheless, look at all these vertical systems. Well, for example, the Soviet Union. And by the way, where is he? Remember, right, there was a vertical. Everything worked very clearly there, but now for some reason it's not there. The question is why. Someone will say, oh well, that's how the vertical fell apart. Yes, it's interesting. But how did it fall apart? No, oh, well, with the vertical, what kind of mess is it? There, everything is clear. Yes, everyone has responsibility. How did it happen that the vertical fell apart? Moreover, if you look more closely, this vertical itself basically destroyed the Soviet Union. I'm not going to go into all the details now, but her participation was definitely decisive, and everyone else just added a little bit from above. Look at some other things. But, today, there is a vertical in Russia. Does everyone like what's going on? Normal, you say? Well, okay, it's the state, it's with the bureaucracy, it's not interested. Here in private corporations, that's where everything is different. Ask people who have worked in large private corporations if they have never worked there themselves. You will learn a lot of interesting things about what kind of awesome order there is, what kind of vertical there is, which keeps its hand on the remote. Real. If we look at corporations that are usually credited with success, such as Google, for example, and there is a very bad freedom. There is even an analogous system of councils, and it is not comprehensive, yes, but nevertheless, the workers' councils exist. And yes, there are a lot of projects being done by people who just want to do this project, and not because they were given such an order by corporations from above. In other words, just if we look at corporations, we will find that those corporations, in which the majority of employees quite consciously want to engage in this activity, show themselves the coolest. And in this case, it turns out that they do not need a vertical. That is, yes, they would like to push bureaucratic issues onto someone, and they themselves would only be engaged in direct activities. But in their direct activities, first of all, they have a bad passion, and secondly, a very weak vertical. In other words, there are a lot of things, if not all of them, based on internal agreements, and not on hierarchy at all. Conversely, those corporations that have existed for a long time are already large and so on. They do not degrade quite quickly. In other words, they turn right into a cosplay of the late Soviet Union, or even of the middle Soviet Union. That is, with all this bureaucratic insanity, with gerontocracy, with idiotic decisions. Often, they would work much better if the whole system was removed from them. Therefore, this, is an example of the reverse rather than the fact that the vertical works. That is, without a vertical, it can become not more of a mess, but less of a mess, for a whole bunch of reasons. Control over corrupt officials, collective decision-making, increased motivation, and so on. Well, I've talked about it all before, but nevertheless, here, I have, as it were, concentrated all these provisions. Further, if it seems to you that the smartest people get to the top in some vertical hierarchies, you are very much mistaken. It's good if an average person turns out to be at the top, and not below average. And this happens all the time. You may ask, how does everything not fall apart at the same time? But first of all, it's falling apart. Name me dictatorships that have existed, well, I don't know, there, for 100 years, for example. Yes, there are such, but there are very few of them. Most fall apart in half a century at most. This is the maximum. A more frequent term. Look at Latin America. A couple of months between the change of dictators. In this regard, it is simply entertaining to read the history of a number of Latin American countries. How the power changed there. And so it could go on for decades. That is, once a month a new dictator, and like this for 10 years. I'm exaggerating a little, but a little. In other words, it is comparable. Comparable, as it were, in terms of power. Maybe, as a result of all this process, the smartest one remained up there. Well, that is, they sawed off all the stupid ones, and finally. This is also not necessary. Read about the entertaining dude Trujillo. So he stayed upstairs for quite a long time. And this is such a genius. Just here to look for such. Well, that is really, dude, judging by what he did, it was like he could go to a madhouse without an examination. In other words, it's probably easy to look at him, talk to him for 3 minutes, and you can sort of lock him up. But nothing, he ruled the country. The vertical felt great with him. Well, there are a lot of powerful examples to give. A separate example does not seem to prove anything. But, if we make such a statement, that a dictator is always smart, say it with statistics. You say that they don't prove anything. Now it's through my mouth, but I'm retelling what I've heard many times. So yes, the examples don't prove anything, but then prove your claim with statistics, not with individual examples. In other words, show that here we have collected information for 1,000 years in all countries, and it turns out that dictators, as a rule, are smarter than average. If it's not proven, it's not proven. In other words, it's just the same statement. Yes, you can say that I am speculatively saying that they are fools in appearance, but in fact they are geniuses. But an equally speculative statement is that they are not fools. On the contrary, they are very smart. But anyway, not only can he turn out to be an idiot, and often it turns out that even if he turns out to be smart, this does not mean that everyone else will be fine from this. Because not only does he have to be smart, he also has to act for the benefit of others, and not for his own. Well, or there is the benefit of a narrow environment of some kind, and this does not follow from the mind at all. It is quite possible for a person to combine. It is very cool to optimize, but in their favor. So, that there is a combination of smart and unselfish, and really understands what all people want, and really implements it. But this is such a rare combination, that you can assume that there have never been such at all. Sometimes there were such personal aspirations that coincided with public ones. And this was a good option, and maybe even a good one for the dictatorship. All other options were such that but for your own good, you have to work for me. And so it will be in the future. If you call it order, but you have a peculiar idea of order. That is, it reminds me, we are all slaves, but there is order, but our overseers keep ours in a tight grip. Yes, we eat poorly, but there is an order that does not allow us to eat well. This is about what it looks like, and exactly such an order is needed. Or when you say order, do you still put something else into this matter? The next question, which in principle was also discussed there in passing, but what if citizens do not guess in solving some issue? Everything will break then. What if the dictator doesn't guess? Or if the dictator did not guess, then everything will be normal. Oh yeah, he's got a responsibility, right? He will probably shoot himself in this case. Or not, the others will shoot him. And or he of others. That is, all the time, as if Grandma had said in two. Be that as it may, the dictator can also be mistaken, like the entire population. Moreover, if the majority of the population is mistaken in our country, then the dictator will almost certainly be mistaken in the same way as the majority, and it will be much harder to convince him, because he is in a special position. You can't just drive up to him with your arguments. Society can be persuaded faster than any individual, especially a very stubborn person, especially if he is mercantile. In other words, he can share some point of view solely because it is more beneficial to him, personally to him, not to everyone as a whole, not to some abstract truth, but it is personally beneficial to him that this should be true. And yes, you can hardly convince him that this is not true. Nevertheless, what to do if the citizens did not guess? I have already said that you just take and revote at any moment, and now the problem is solved. But there is another important point of motivation. The dictator makes a decision for others, and it only applies to him indirectly. Well, that is, he may be afraid that if people die of hunger there, he will be overthrown. But he himself will not starve to death. In most cases, this is what they will be. If a war starts, yes, he can be killed by a random bomb, but it's not him who will storm the trenches there in the first rows. He's just going to be sitting in the bunker. In other words, he has even less motivation to think about decisions in principle than those people who will be affected by the results. And even if they don't know how at first, but the fact that they are constantly faced with the fact that the decisions they make affect them will motivate them to think more, read some special literature, ask around some specialists. Note, do not entrust them, and do not believe their words just like that, just because they are experts. And she asks around in order to get arguments from them. Something that convinces. Do not make a statement like that, because I am an expert, but arguments. It's better to do it this way, because this factor, this factor, this factor, and if you do it differently, there will be such a result, such a result, such a result. Arguments that explain the state of things and certain forecasts, as well as what these forecasts are made of. If a person has not guessed correctly, and then receives some feedback, he also has more motivation to change his mind. That is, well, he is mistaken in the structure of the phenomenon, the physics of the phenomenon, in the logic of the phenomenon, but he sees a negative result. In other words, we assumed that the phenomenon is arranged like this, and therefore made this decision. But it makes us feel bad. That is, it needs to be changed. If this is a dictator who is not affected by the results, he can persist in his delusions for much longer than someone who gets very serious discomfort from this wrong decision, from this delusion. Because the dictator can think these assholes, they just don't understand anything. That's why everything is so bad for them. They need to issue 10 more orders for them to do their best there. It is necessary to appeal to their patriotic faith there, I do not know, to the proletarian consciousness, the communist one, and then everything will get better. A person who suffers from this himself, he naturally understands that calling here, not calling, it will still be bad for him. And so, he has incentives to change his mind and adjust something. If you do not overcome your global delusion, then at least try to change the local consequence of it. He has a lot more. In other words, he has much more motivation in this. And accordingly, a citizen who suffers from this case himself, he lives in a certain group of citizens who are approximately equal to him. And as a result, there is also much more reason for empathy. That is, when a person understands that the same people live nearby, he will, on average, sympathize somehow more. And even if he himself has nothing more or less, he will be more stressed by the fact that other people are not even more or less bad at all. Rather than a person who has been living in an ivory tower for the last 30 years, that is birth, and does not associate himself with other people at all. That is, from his point of view, the world may well be arranged in such a way that when an ordinary citizen suffers, well, sorry, it's such a cruel world. But when the dictator personally suffers, yes, it is a universal catastrophe. Here, it is necessary to make some efforts, and a completely disproportionate discomfort. But when a private suffers, but why? Well, yes, life is so hard. God so bequeathed everyone to suffer. In general, there is a huge difference between them. So yes, they may not guess. I'm not saying that citizens will always guess, but they have more motivation, first of all, to guess, and secondly, to learn to guess. And thirdly, to correct those cases when they did not guess. One more question. Won't the decision-making process be too long? Well, yes, until everyone agrees with everyone there. This thing, like the previous one, stems from some misunderstanding of Terver. If you read the article Mathematical Justification of Direct Democracy, almost the entire third part of this article is devoted to assessing the speed of decision-making by the dictator and the population, the speed of changing your mind if you didn't guess, and similar things. And it shows that the range of parameters that the dictator will change his mind about much faster than the entire population, and it is very narrow. That is, usually the population will make a decision faster. And only if it all consists of some kind of exorbitant mega breaks, and you are a genius dictator, whom the world has never seen, then he will win against the population, that is. There are some formulas given as a result of numerical experiments, but here I will say so in words. Yes, what lies behind this phenomenon? Why does it turn out like this? First of all, there is only one dictator, and at some point, he has to say I have changed my mind, or I have made a decision, even if it seems to him that he almost accepted it, but he didn't say that. He didn't accept it at all. In other words, it has a binary state in its interaction with the outside world. That is, inside, he may have a smooth process of some kind, but when interacting with the outside world, his state is binary. Either he has already voiced it, or he has not yet voiced it. The population, that is, a large group of people, has completely different layouts. He does not need to change his mind about everything entirely. Therefore, a bunch of intermediate states appear. Between no one has changed their mind, and everyone has changed their mind, a bunch of intermediate states. Changed my mind, 10% there, 20, 30, 40, half. So, for purely technical reasons, if we have one option that got 60% of the votes, and another option got 40% of the votes, we don't need the whole population to change their minds, so that the second option now wins. Well, because 40% is already for him, right? And we don't even need 60% to change their minds, so the gap is smaller. The gap is 20% of everything. That is, 11% of the entire population will change their mind, yes, and there will be 51 for the second option, and 49 for the other. So he won. It is clear that changing your mind about 10% and changing your mind about 100% on time costs are completely different things. Moreover, these 10% are not any specific 10%, but any people who will make up 10% in total. It may not be obvious either, but you can just, I do not know, leave the dice, and make sure that if you throw 10 dice, then the probability that at least one will drop out, say a 6, it is much greater than if we threw one dice. But, just because there are 10 of these cubes, it's the same here. That is, 10% consisting of arbitrary people is a much higher rate of change of mind than if it were 10%. But named by name, what we need is for them to change their minds. That is, here, for purely technical, purely statistical reasons, the change of mind is, in fact, much faster. But not only that, I have already said that there is motivation. The dictator may not care. If this is really a mistake that affects the standard of living of the population, the level of its satisfaction, the population also has a bad motivation to change their mind. In other words, it greatly speeds up the process. It may seem to the dictator that you are not an important question at all. What are they doing there? They say there is no bread. Yes, let them eat cakes. Well, what are they clinging to? I'm kind of thinking about the fate of the universe here. They're with their bread. At the same time, a person knows better what is more important to him personally. Well, if there are a lot of such people, it is quite possible that they will appreciate the problems with bread much faster than the dictator of the steering wheel, who, by the way, and at the same time, everything is fine with bread. In addition, imagining a smart dictator, and for some reason, we also attribute some kind of monstrous awareness in general, in all spheres. Well, okay. People sometimes realize that there are no such people who know all the areas that are needed to ensure people's lives perfectly. But then people say, well, okay, he will hire specialists there to advise him. In other words, the question arises, and if he does not understand them and does not hire specialists, how is he better than the population? Well, and so it's not him, but the population that will hire these specialists. And maybe he can handle it even better. The question arises, why will it cope better? Dictators are smarter. Well, because in order to understand whether someone is an expert in some field, you need to understand at least something in this area yourself. And how does the dictator have a sufficient understanding of the region, in all areas? But this time is also not enough. At the same time, if we take a large society, there will probably be people who not only understand this area a little bit, but they understand it coolly. They will also be able to check specialists. And if 1,000 people confirm something to me, it's a much stronger thing than when one, even if he calls himself a specialist, at the same time. In other words, we as a society have hired a group of experts, but at the same time, everyone knows a dozen, or maybe 100 people, who also understand the topic. Even if he doesn't understand anything about the topic himself, he still has, as it were, additional witnesses, that is, people whom he trusts there to one degree or another, and who tell him whether the experts are telling the truth. Some of them, of course, can lie or make mistakes, not only from specialists, yes, from such specialists in society, as it were, who were not included in the commission, but nevertheless, there are many of them. This is a much more reinforced situation, as it were, than then, but the dictator somehow guessed that this is really a cool specialist. If it seems to you that dictators are constantly guessing, think about this. Both in the Russian and in the American army, there were whole groups that investigated the question of how to use psychics in military operations. We can say that this is a hypothesis, right? You never know, suddenly it works. You know, this hypothesis turned out to be so hypothetical that these groups have been funded for decades. And the taxpayers' money, of course. In other words, these clever dictators have been standing there. What's there? What's there? For decades. Some scammers have easily led them by the nose, pretending that these are very promising results. Well, this is to the question of whether the vertical guarantees reports, or there is a dictator. There is also such a question, not a question, but as if an objection, which sounds like how so? This means that anyone will make the decision. But do you think that an academician and a janitor there are equally well versed in some kind of issue there? Well, first of all, as I said before, you can ask the specialists there anyway. In other words, you don't have to figure out the issue yourself. You need to choose those you trust. But the real thing behind this objection, as a rule, is not what it actually says. That is, the person presents it in such a way that I worry, and suddenly it will be decided not by an academician, but by a janitor. Well, what he really means is that I would like it to be decided by me and my beloved guru. Yes, the guru, of course, is smarter, he will decide better, but if anything happens, he will ask me for tips. And therefore, decisions will be made that I personally think are correct, and it is naturally much more profitable for me. That is, in this disguised form, under the concern for the welfare of the whole people, there is actually a concern for their personal well-being, and a person in this way wants to bargain for some preferences for himself. I hope that his guru will really decide how it is beneficial to him, which is also not always realized. But nevertheless, you might think that there is something in it anyway. The Academy understands better. Maybe we can somehow do more weight, or something like that, or even remove the janitors there. Let only the academics decide. But let's recall what was said at the very beginning of the report, when it was explained why one person is one vote. We do not have a universal absolute, a universal information field that objectively makes it clear who is a real academic and who is fake. If it seems to you that academics are a kind of guarantee, yes, remember the existence, for example, of such an organization as Rogan, or a bunch of organizations that register themselves as academics and then begin to literally sell diplomas. Or not to trade, but simply to hand them over to some people who seem to be profitable, according to the current political conjuncture. Well, look in the Russian Federation. We have almost only academicians at the top there, at least doctors of sciences, and almost all of them for some reason became doctors of sciences, already being in this post. Can you imagine? Yes, what smart people. They worked in public office, and at that time, they were still writing meaningful dissertations, which, however, if you read them, there are great doubts about the meaningfulness. It's good if someone smart wrote to them. Often, there is just a stream of nonsense. But I'm sure it's just because I don't grasp the full scale of their intellectual talent, and just don't understand that smart things are written there, and therefore it seems to me that this is some kind of nonsense. Nevertheless, these same people, being mega-smart specialists in their question, often make completely idiotic decisions. Do you always think that what the leaders of any country say is smart? Well, it's clear that you may have some favorites. These are the ones who always talk only smart, but the rest of them, are they really smart? They are all intellectually gifted, because if they are in these positions, they are specialists. It is possible to recall particular cases when completely real academicians, that is, not with a purchased diploma, but with a completely real one, and having very bad scientific achievements, suddenly began to talk nonsense. Sometimes it happens when they talk about some other area, for example, as in the case of academician Fomenko. And sometimes it happens almost about their field, as it was, for example, with Linus Pauling, who did not look like a real academician and twice Nobel laureate, at some point believed that vitamin C, however, cures all diseases, and very actively promoted this cause, despite all the objections that they were lying on the surface there. In other words, this is not a guarantee. Perhaps a janitor who is fond of something in his spare time will tell you more intelligent things on the topic than a person who is an academician. I'm not even talking about an academician with a purchased diploma, but even an academician with a real diploma. Do I want to say that education does not help? Not at all. Education, when it is normal, yes, it helps a lot. Another thing is that not all education is normal, and not every diploma, however, indicates that a person understands the topic well. And finally, even when he testifies that he understands the topic well, this is not a guarantee that the way he understands it, the way he was taught, is really true. That is, he has learned something, but he has learned the current version, and it is far from the fact that this version is correct, and even more so, it is not the fact that it is final. In other words, these are completely different skills, and not only skills, including a combination of circumstances. That is, even if this thought haunts you about the fact that anyone will make a decision, not because you want personal preferences for yourself and your guru. It is necessary to remember that you want a boon, but a diploma. This is not a guarantee that this person will bring just this benefit. Making a decision by anyone would be dangerous if he made it alone. Here, we could observe the whole pack of charms, both with the academicians of the Russian Academy of Sciences, and with doctoral ministers, and so on, and so on. And here is the entire population. Yes, someone does not understand the topic, but others do. There is no universal standard, so look at the information that is provided to you by a variety of sources, and try to analyze this matter somehow. If in doubt, you always have the right to vote as recommended by your favorite specialist, or even your favorite guru. In any case, it is much safer, because then you can change your mind if it turns out that the guru or specialist is inflated. Then the question is from another area. Are there parties in direct democracy? Well, that is, whether they should exist, whether they can exist, and in what form they exist. In my opinion, this is the case here. Parties, of course, can be a right of citizens to unite in whatever groups they want. If it does not harm others, that is, if it is not a criminal group, yes, please unite. But a party is the same as a chess lovers club. The same public organization. You have the right to create it, just as you have the right to create a chess lovers club. But she does not receive any legal benefits from this case. You can coordinate efforts, agree on something inside. You're right. From a legal point of view, the party is no different from anything else. In other words, they don't seem to exist in terms of voting. Now in some countries, parties live according to some special laws. That is, it is easier for them to get into the parliaments of these countries. They can receive state funding. In a direct democracy, all this does not exist. Crowdsourcing, please. You can collect donations there from some sympathizers, but nothing directly depends on the money. You don't need to have some kind of fund for the elections. First of all, there are no elections. If you use this money to propagandize some point of view, well, please propagandize. Anyone can promote their point of view. including by crowdsourcing money for it. The party is not in any special position here. Someone thinks that the party will help him. Maybe join, maybe the truth will help. The chess club of Riv can also agitate for some kind of policy. Another question in terms of the global device. Is it possible to abolish direct democracy in a direct democracy? Not by seizing power, not by the junta, but by voting for the abolition. And the answer is, yes, you can. Well, because if it's true, the will of all citizens, what will you do about it? You can even enter some kind of law. You can't do that. The law can be repealed. Moreover, even if it is written that the law cannot be abolished, all citizens want, what force will keep them from it? That is, they can cancel, of course. In other words, this system, it rests solely on each person's understanding of a certain pattern. And the pattern is as follows. It's true that you can democratically abolish direct democracy, but it will be much harder for you to democratically bring it back. In other words, this step is completely irrational, regardless of whether it interferes with you locally or not. If you think that we will temporarily cancel it now, we will achieve our plans, and then we will introduce it back. But with this it may not work, and it may well be that you will not achieve your plans. And you just won't achieve your plans, but someone else will. But after that, it will become much harder for you to achieve your plans, because you will lose the opportunities that you have in direct democracy, which in some sense are integral, but until it is cancelled, they are integral for you. In other words, you can propagandize, you can vote, your supporters can do exactly the same. After that, alas, how will you get it back? Apparently, in the same way that they were injected for the first time, and it will be much more difficult. That is, you can cancel it. But think about it, does it make sense? If citizens refuse it so easily, but it's not lucky that their example is science to others. The next question is also related to global rules. Well, it's clear with direct democracy, right? And if you cancel it, then you lead the figs. And are all the other issues taken with the help of direct democracy? Well, there are questions about human rights there. Well, because suddenly the citizens will decide that, well, I do not know, Negroes should be pressed by a majority of votes. Maybe it is necessary to write somewhere that it is impossible. This decision cannot be revised. The question is where? Where will you put it? What is the law in direct democracy that is higher than direct democracy? Most importantly, what will prevent it from being cancelled? That is, there is no higher power that will guarantee you that the law written somewhere will be fulfilled. So if you're worried about minority rights or something else, campaign for it. In other words, explain to people why they should be in these minorities. Fortunately, you are not the only one doing this. And now, in most countries of the world, people already fully understand this. Yes, why is it true and fair and expedient to give everyone equal rights, regardless of origin? But it is impossible to enter it as some kind of immutable law, and moreover, it is also impossible not with a direct democracy. Well, the dictator is so progressive, he wrote that the rights of minorities should be respected, and everyone is against it, except for these minorities. And they are really a minority. There are 1% of the population there, for example, and 99% of their rights do not want to comply. And that, well, he ordered it, for some time he will restrain it. But it's all being sabotaged. In other words, this is the law. Someone has to monitor its implementation, and if they themselves believe that it is not necessary to comply with it, they will definitely try. And this dictator will definitely sit out all this time that it takes for everyone to change their mind. Or he will be shot by angry citizens the next day, because here he goes against their will so cynically, and for them it is so important, that they can't stand it directly. In other words, this issue is not a minus of direct democracy. It is technically impossible under any circumstances at all. Yes, you can dream that we are going to have our wonderful guru, so he answers this question correctly. But it's luck. Yes, if you have one, if he really answers it like that, if it was he who was in power. But this is a confluence of circumstances where a bunch of things can go wrong. He may, for example, lie to you. He may change his mind when he comes to power. Maybe it was such a figure of speech for him. That is, he kind of gave for it, but it doesn't matter to him. But he will give it up for something else. He can die at any moment, and the ones following him, will they definitely follow in his footsteps? Or they will say we cancel from the next day, Now it's just like the funeral march will finish, and the opposite state of things will already be. In other words, with a direct democracy, this is a much more stable state. If most people are convinced that it is so right, the death of one of them, it will not turn everything upside down. This situation will continue to persist. And most importantly, the decision made here will be respected by the majority. So there was actually a majority for this decision. They have much less reason not to observe it than when the majority of the population is against it. It's the way it is here, and I agree with it, and everyone else does it. Why shouldn't I do it too? Just as it is impossible in any way to keep direct democracy by some law that stands above direct democracy, so it is impossible to introduce any other kind of laws that stand above direct democracy. And it's just not technically feasible. So, now we will answer the questions that appeared during the stream. There are still a bunch of those that were asked before, or during previous streams. There are really a lot of them, and I won't be able to keep up at one time, but, fortunately, at least 2 more transfers need to be carried out. One of them is about conditional probability, which got me. Apparently, people will have to read a short course on what probability theory is, what conditional probability is, and, well, show a model. It certainly seems obvious to me, but what if people don't understand? There too, in general, then there will be answers to questions. And another one about why attempts to somehow outwit probability theory, after all, to hand over weights to specialists, will not work either. And there will be a checkmate. Models, graphs, so get ready. But nevertheless, the questions that were asked now, I tried to group them like this, reading, in general, during the asking. Here's the question. What about the armed forces? There is a widespread opinion that an army is effective only if there is a strict hierarchy. Is a horizontal device possible in this case? The same question was asked before, but not in a chat, but through a tribute lurk. The question sounds like this. Lex, the effectiveness of a system with a leader has been proven both theoretically and empirically. I have been convinced of this myself many times in my life and business games. How do you argue the opposite? It can be seen that the questions are similar, and the first person says that there is a common opinion. The second one seems to confirm that there are really carriers of this opinion. I have already touched on this in part today, in the main part of the report. Yes, that it is often just a way to fool people, well, through secrecy, or through some kind of built-in hierarchy, well, in advance right. They're through the aristocracy, or castes, or the system of ranks. It's all equally justified, they say, but these are special people like that, and that's the only reason it all works. But the thing is, if we take a closer look, well, first of all, it doesn't always work, because if one commander won the battle, then the other commander probably lost it, who was on the opposite side. And they are both professionals, and most often, they both have a professional army with a hierarchy. That is, it works like this every other time, literally. This is the first moment. And the second point, even more important for this topic, is in fact what the army is acting for. Most wars, they are not waged for the benefit of the population, they are waged for the benefit of the dictator. And often the military is involved in this quite consciously. Someone is there for patriotic reasons, as if in good faith mistaken, and the other part is selfish. In other words, they do their job, they get paid for it. Then, some have there the concept of some kind of honor, all that, pathos. You can then tell how you waved everyone away, well, like that. But this usually makes the population feel bad. Another thing is that, suppose we already have a direct democracy, and now we are being attacked by those who obey the dictator. Somehow they need to be brushed off. Suddenly we will be ineffectively brushing off. After all, we checked, and scientists probably proved it. Here the question immediately arises, but actually, what kind of scientists? Here is a person who writes, the effectiveness of a system with a leader has been proven both theoretically and empirically. Homeopathy is well proven by scientists empirically and theoretically. And the fact that the Earth is flat. Do you understand? When you are not told how it is proven, by what method, can you trust this data? Did you make the right logical conclusions? In other words, they don't tell you anything, except that British scientists have proved it. And you, in fact, have nothing to object to. And it should be objected to like this. But I believe that they have proved the opposite. Come on, it's my word against yours. By the way, it is very convenient in a direct democracy. I will have supporters here. They will also give their word. And so, we won by a majority of votes. Out of the blue, right? It's just that they left on a show-off. Naturally, this should be checked, and it should be checked experimentally, and the experiments should be set correctly. There should be a lot of them, because, well, this is often quite a thing, especially research in the field of psychology, and some other, slightly ideologized, and at the same time, well, let's just say, not very well mathematized sciences. Well, in general, they are placed completely incorrectly. It is impossible to draw conclusions from them, the ones that are being made. Well, their people want to check. Well, I do not know how to take notes of lectures. It is better with a piece of paper and a pen, or with a laptop. They take two groups. Everything seems to be fine here, right? The bad thing is that they stop there. Here we checked on two groups, and that's it. You can publish your conclusions. So, the group of those who write with a pen, it consists of people who wrote with a pen on paper for the previous 15 years, because it was at school, then it was at university. The second group consists of them, of those who have been writing with a pen on paper for 15 years, and they may have a laptop. Here they see it for the first time. Well, okay, not for the first time, maybe they used it, but they used it in order to, I do not know, Instagram to watch. That is, they do not have training. They do not have the habit of taking notes. I am now abstracting from the question of why it is necessary to take notes of them at all, when you can shoot a video camera. But this is a comparison of two groups that are completely biased in one direction. Naturally, they will succeed, which is worse on a laptop. The same thing happens if we take a group of people who have trained all previous years exclusively in a hierarchical system, and we say, but let's try it with direct democracy. Oh well, something didn't work out. Well, let's justify any other things as well. In other words, we will take people who are very good at one thing and do not know how to do something else. We will offer them to do the first and the second to make sure, but it's necessary they do the first better. Well, of course it's better, because they know how to do it, and the second one is not. It's the same with the conclusions about the army, the police, and other hierarchical structures. Recruit people who are used to exactly such conditions. Well, yes, they can be hard to find, but we have examples from history. That is, here are some partisan detachments in Spain, or there in the Soviet Union, during the Second World War. They didn't have a central command from Moscow, or Madrid, or Barcelona from somewhere. They actually acted on their own. The hierarchy was sometimes there, sometimes it wasn't. That is, there is a nominal commander, but it depends on the authority, whether he will be obeyed. Or maybe it won't. But nevertheless they acted. Somehow even professional military resisted. Another thing is that there are few of them, so they did not have a big impact. But we didn't check. But what would have happened if there were a lot of them? And what would have happened if the whole army was arranged like that? What would have happened if we had trained people like this from the very beginning? But fortunately, we have another area where experiments are much easier now, computer games. That is, we take any strategy or network shooter and look at how people play there. You'd be surprised, but most teams, even those that play like professionally, well, I mean, to get cash prizes at competitions, right? They actually play. Well, even this is not a direct democracy. They do not vote on every issue there, but they play exactly. Well, almost anarchically. That is, they are about equal. And it turns out that it is really very profitable. That is, if a person tries. Well, for example, there is a commander mode in Battlefield. Almost no one ever plays from it, because it's useless. You don't influence anything. There are only, let's say, 16 players on one side, and you won't have time to look into all their cameras. The commander on the battlefield does not have such an opportunity at all, but here it is. A person simply will not have time to look at all these cameras, and it is much clearer to each of the players what is really going on there. That is, in reality, the commander turns out to be, at best, in the role of such a dude who, well, I do not know, sits there on the mast and looks into the distance, whether the Earth has appeared there. A useful role? Well, yes, probably useful. In other words, he could probably coordinate actions in some way. Well, in the sense that if a person has no time to report what is happening around there via audio communication, the commander could tell everyone, looking at the map, and say, that's where everyone ran to the left, and Vasya ran to the right. Vasya, you'd better run to the left too. Well, it's not like it has a very strong impact. That is, a much greater influence is the ability to navigate under such a very fast signal by fragmentary phrases. Everyone's understanding of what everyone else is doing, everyone's understanding of how to play this game at all, working out some tactical techniques and not hitting there, not clicking the target with the mouse, namely, well, understanding how to move there, how to hide, that kind of thing. If you take any strategy games, there are often people playing there. Well, for example, 5 people play for one side. He has his own detachments, but no one is standing over them. And they also cope with nothing like that. Moreover, it would have caught on if it was profitable to have a central command. It would be in all games. Almost always, even if the developers did not make any effort to do this. If it were profitable, it would prevail for purely evolutionary reasons, but on the contrary, it turns out to be almost unprofitable. Coordination, yes, very profitable. It is very profitable to tell where what is happening. It is very profitable to make an offer. Let's go, and here I will go to the left, and you to the right. It doesn't matter if it's a strategy or a shooter. But some kind of commander standing above everyone, who forces them to act by order, apparently does not pay off if he is nowhere to be found. We haven't tested this on a real battlefield, and let's assume that the stakes are high there. Or maybe another option that seems more likely to me. The stakes are not high there, but it's already the way it is. You go check it out. How will you do it? In other words, for this, you need to come and say, remove this army of yours with the generals there. We will be with direct democracy. As long as we don't have a direct democracy in our country, you can't do that, and, accordingly, you can't check. That is why we did not check this case in reality. Not because it has never worked, but simply because there are no technical possibilities for this. And at any model test, in a computer or a game, whether tactical exercises, you can always say afterwards, and it wasn't really there. That is, not a falsifiable hypothesis. Until we make a direct democracy in which it can be verified, we will not be able to verify it. And opponents will always have an excuse that you did not check, and everything that you checked, it is not proof. Someone asked about the same thing later. Well, in general, there are problems with the execution of decisions in direct democracy on a large scale, and I really like the way such large structures will be arranged non-hierarchically, just like Roscosmos. This has already been considered. Here's the example of Roscosmos. That's really, I can't imagine how the citizens of the whole country gathered and voted for the fact that let's Roscosmos distribute someone's songs there and release perfumes with the name Let's Go. That's real. I can't imagine it. In other words, the way it is now arranged, it should already speak in favor of the fact that it can no longer be made worse. That is, any other option, it will already be better. At the same time, you probably know who heads Roscosmos. Do you know who heads NASA? Well, or they're during the lunar program headed. Well, there's a list of the council. Was there a board of directors, or how does it work at all? Nobody knows. That is, yes, there is a central control, but it was so dark and so invisible that no one knows about it. Here is an example of an organization that was very successful, but at the same time, the management did not position itself in any particular way, and at the same time, they had a very developed autonomy of the department there and all that. Well, in other words, the management really did not climb there, because the managers, as a rule, understood that they did not understand most of the topics there, and the best thing they could do was to provide a link between American society, since it is funded, of course, from taxes, and at the same time completely open to Americans. Well, in fact, it is now open to foreigners. Well, it's just that it's officially open for Americans, but not for foreigners. Quota. The best thing they could do was to ensure coordination, transfer these finances from one area, as it were, from taxes, yes, into specific projects. And at the same time, there is a distribution. As far as I know, I can incorrectly say here, yes, the distribution. It was discussed all the time. That is, who should get how much of what. This is not some personal director of NASA deprived. Here is an example of how it will be managed. In other words, it is a very valuable skill, and everything in the world works only on it. That is, the self-organization of people, the ability of each employee to understand more or less what others are doing, and to negotiate with them personally, perhaps with some help from the coordinator. But if the employees do not know how to do this, the organization will collapse very quickly. He will sell perfumes and not launch rockets into space. Next question. I'm sorry, I'm reading out of order, yes, but I'm trying to take into account, yes, so as not to allow anything. Will there be an analog of a residence permit in the new system, at the state level? After all, it is necessary to take into account the number of inhabitants in a locality in order to count on it, a certain number of benefits. We need to watch videos about the economy of the society of the future. Right, it says that it is not necessary to take this into account in a special way. There is a way to collect it automatically, and for this, a residence permit is not needed. Again, it is impossible to say whether it will be for sure or not, because I cannot decide for direct democracy, as it should be, and this does not apply to direct democracy itself. This is a concrete decision, but I suspect that there is not exactly an equivalent of a residence permit, but some features of a residence permit. They will continue to exist in some form, and they will continue to exist. From what do I draw this conclusion? I draw this conclusion from the fact that in a number of countries that are already quite close to direct democracy, for example, Switzerland, in the Netherlands, it is also more or less developed there. In some places, well, there are autonomous zones there. They tried to do. Some of them have really already closed. So, everywhere you need to get permission from local residents to live near them. And it comes to the point that here in Switzerland, you can buy an apartment, and this is your right. But you can't live in it. If you were not allowed by the locals, you can own it and you can rent it to someone whose residence was not approved. But you can't live yourself. And this is due to a very obvious thing. That is, if you behave like a goat, if you get drunk there and yell songs, then you interfere with everyone else. If this is such a tradition here, then you will just come to court. In other words, they all gather in the evenings, and I have also seen such examples. Yes, in some other places. People gather in the evening, sit, sing songs, there's like the whole yard gathered. And in this regard, well, you want to settle somewhere, people talk to you. This is quite logical. If you are going to rent an apartment with someone, with random people, in most cases you will also have a desire to first find out who it is before agreeing. Because the fact that you can pay less for it, it may not pay back, as it were, those medications that you will have to buy to treat your nerves. Then, as an acquaintance, but I was saying that there was a friend who did something like direct democracy at his company, and they discussed the budget, among other things. How does a friend show financial information to employees? The question is strange. Well, there are a million ways. You can show accounting reports. You can show a summary. In other words, it does not matter at all. That is, anything will do. If everyone knows that this information is open, they don't have to be there with seals. Well, look at some kind of document with seals. They can look at the sign in Excel without any signatures. If they have doubts, well, yes, they will have to show them with seals. There is a bank account to show the state. These pieces of paper are already officially issued by banks. In other words, this is not a matter of principle. Does it show somehow? He has a trusting relationship, so I think there are no such problems there to get something with seals and signatures. Have you tried to organize such a democracy in a team? I'd rather try. In other words, I have repeatedly tried to make a system in a team in which voting is not needed at all. It works great, by the way, because in most cases people agree, well, almost immediately. One of the systems, well, we vote as it were, only if there is at least one who objects. Anyone can put forward a proposal. If no one objected, we believe that it has been accepted. But this works in absentia. In absentia, of course not. But as people also say, yes, it's impossible. 99% of decisions as a result are made like this. Well, because someone said it. It seems obvious to others. Then the next part of the question is how the conditional leaders or flaks reacted, and so on. But that's actually the problem. That is, the bullshit begins at the moment when a person comes there not to benefit others, but to amuse his ego, or to solve some financial issues at the expense of others, or to strengthen his status. That's where the person will insist that let's hand over all the reins of government to me. As a rule, it is better not to agree to this, because such a person will bring much less benefit than harm. This is incomparably less. In other words, it is extremely rare that some person who insists that he should be made the main one, however, will later prove useful. I mean, yes, it's a problem. In general, I hope that we will make a stream with one of the people who have organized the Direct Democracy Party now. We sort of agreed in advance, but only to agree on the date. He will probably tell you in more detail, but he noticed the same situation, about which he told me that, well, we are creating some kind of chat there in order to discuss issues, and there is a lull, and only a few particularly active swear and pour feces on each other and everyone else.
Несколько особо активных ругаются и поливают друг друга фекалиями и всех остальных.
That's the main problem with direct democracy, right? Here is the fact that there are a small number of people who absolutely do not know how to conduct discussions, and in general their goal is not to convince someone, they have a goal to subdue. That is, they don't need the best, they need the best for them. Yes, that's not how it's better for everyone, but how it's better for them. And so they arrange such stuff. In the case of chat rooms, in my opinion, this is solved by the differentiation of sites. That is, if you have a system, and everyone there can create a chat and invite anyone there. Well, okay, we created a chat. 10 Morans took over the entire space in it. Yes, it has become impossible to conduct a conversation because they are throwing slops in all directions there, leaving 100 comments per hour. Well, my God, people who need to do something, they create a second chat with one mouse click. And these 10, about whom they already know, they do not add there. A few iterations, and it starts working. But it starts working, I emphasize, only if people really need to discuss something. If this is done out of a wish, let it be, yes, we don't want to talk, but it's the way it should be. In 100% of cases, there will be such nonsense. But nevertheless, with the ability to create sites freely, yes, and without registration and sums, it solves this problem. Tell us about the details of anonymous voting. Verification of anonymity. There, it is necessary to discuss purely algorithms in general. They are complex. But in fact, ensuring anonymity is based on the fact that a person has a certain public key by which it is possible to verify its uniqueness. But at the same time, it is impossible to verify who it belongs to. This can be done in different ways, but let's imagine an example like this. 20 votes were cast by people. They were encrypted with some kind of public keys. In order to decipher it, everyone has to do some action with their own open and send the result, yes, to the next stage. That is, in this way we will decipher this case only if all 20 were real. For example, like this,
Например, вот так.
but
Но при
at
этом
the
мы не
same
будем
time,
знать, у
we
кого
won't know who
какой.
has which one. Well, I'm not a
Ну,
cryptography
я не
expert.
специалист по
Yes, I have some
криптографии, да, но
ideas.
какие-то представления есть.
I just know that there
Я
are
знаю
such
просто, что
ways.
такие способы
Everything
существуют.
is in
В
detail,
деталях и
and
в
with
схеме, и
stability
с анализом
analysis, it is
устойчивости.
necessary to look for a
Это надо
cryptography
специалиста по
specialist. But
криптографии искать.
nevertheless,
Но тем
they
не
are
менее,
really
они
solved in this
действительно
way.
так
That is,
решаются. То есть
in
в
most
большинстве
countries of the
стран
world,
мира
banks are
банки
required
обязаны
to make
делать
the
операции
operation
анонимными.
anonymous,
Но
but
при
at the
этом
same
им надо
time, they
проверить,
need to
что
check
они
that they are
используются
writing off a
счетом
real person from
настоящего
the account.
человека.
It would seem that to our
Казалось бы,
simultaneously
два
unattainable.
одновременно
But
недостижимы.
nevertheless,
Но тем не
there are
менее есть
algorithms for how to
алгоритмы, как
maintain
сохранить
anonymity,
анонимность
and
и
at the
при
same
этом
time establish
установить,
from which account
с
is
какого
debited.
счета списывается.
You can read there about
Можно
some virtual
почитать там про
coins.
какие-то виртуальные монеты.
I didn't fully
Не
understand.
до конца
Well, more
понял.
precisely,
Ну,
I
точнее,
did
я
not
не до
fully
конца
remember.
запомнил.
When I read
Когда я
it, I
читал, я
understood it in
понял
its
это
entirety.
целиком.
But
Но
since I haven't
поскольку
been
я этим
doing
не
this since,
занимался
of
с тех
course,
пор,
the
естественно,
details have
детали
been erased,
стерлись
and it's not at
и
all
совершенно
contradictory and logically true. It's me who
непротиворечивые
needs to
логически
prepare to
верно,
tell
и
it.
мне надо готовиться, чтобы это рассказать.
The previous
Предыдущий
question,
вопрос
the
человек
person here adds,
добавляет:
I tried in the
Я
club
пробовал
team.
в
The
клубном
local leaders of the
коллективе,
Elves were
местные
very
лидеры
dissatisfied
альфачи
and
были
went
очень
where they needed
недовольны
to.
и шли
Yes.
куда
And then,
надо,
they
да.
began to
Потом
understand
начинали
the
понимать
advantages of
плюсы
such a
такой
system. Well,
системы.
actually, I'm a review
Собственно,
firm.
я отзывов
Well,
от,
I have
ну,
received
от
such
многих
reviews
такие
from
отзывы
many
получал.
that yes,
Что
there
да,
are
есть
people who are
люди,
hungry for
которых
power,
жажда
so they
власти,
really
вот
get in the
они
way.
действительно
There are
решают.
also
Еще
people
есть
who do
люди,
not know
которые
how
не
to talk
умеют
at
вообще
all.
беседовать.
There are those who do not
Есть
know how
такие,
to talk
которые не
online.
умеют
That is,
беседовать
in a
именно в
personal
сети. То
conversation,
есть вот в
they would
личном
not allow
разговоре
themselves
они
to
бы
do
себе
this.
такое не
But on the
позволяли. А
web,
вот в
it
сети им
seems to them,
кажется: а чё
what's
такого?
wrong?
Я
I'll
вот
tell you that
скажу,
he's
что
a
он
goat.
козёл,
He
что
can't
он
reach me
не
there in any
дотянется
way.
никак.
Then they are very
Потом очень
surprised. But
удивляются: а
why
чё
are they
эти
being
люди
rude?
говорят?
People write like
Люди
this.
так и
I
пишут: а я
thought that's
думал,
where
вы
everything is
культурные
cultural.
все.
Well, damn,
Ну,
you
блин,
read your
почитай свои
comments.
комменты.
If you started with
Если ты начал
rudeness,
с
do you
хамства, то
expect that
ждёшь,
you will
что
be
к тебе будут
treated
хорошо
well or
относиться,
something?
что ли?
No.
Нет.
Well, there are those
Ну,
who
а
do not
есть те,
understand
которые
it,
это не
and if they are
понимают.
not
И если
somehow
их каким-то
isolated from
образом
themselves or from a
не
whole group of
изолировать
people,
от
they will be
себя или
very
от
much in the
целой
way.
группы людей, они будут очень сильно
You can't
мешать.
just take and
Просто
deprive
взять и
them of their
лишить их
rights.
прав нельзя.
Accordingly, we have to cheat
Соответственно,
somehow.
надо как-то
The
хитрить.
trick is this:
Хитрость
everyone
такая:
can
каждый
create
может
chats
создавать
where he is
чатики,
personally
где
the
он личный
administrator and
администратор,
call people
и
there.
туда звать
That
людей.
is, these
То есть эти
people can
люди тоже
too,
могут,
just
просто
no
никто
one
не
will go to
пойдет.
them. That is, they
То
were
есть
not
их как
kicked
бы не
out,
выгнали,
they
их
were
не
not
лишили
deprived
прав.
of their
Все
rights.
права у них
All their
ровно
rights
такие
are
же, как
exactly the
у
same as the
остальных.
others. They decided to
Они
listen to
сами себя
themselves
лишили
because they don't
аудитории,
know how
потому
to
что они не умеют
communicate.
общаться.
Next, is there
Дальше.
any amendment to
Есть
the traditions,
какая-то
the
поправка
mentality
на
of society
традиции,
in such a
менталитет
democracy?
общества при такой
Well, I don't
демократии?
know.
Я не
People will
знаю.
decide
Люди
that there
решат,
is,
что есть,
so there will
значит,
be. How
будет.
I will be
Как и за
responsible
все
for all
общество отвечу.
societies. If there is a risk
Есть
that
ли
in a
риск, что при
democracy there will
демократии
be an analog
произойдет
of the us
аналог
rezoning?
реанimирования
And
в
this, by the
США?
way,
А это,
is a
кстати,
great
отличная
thing. I
штука.
just
Вот
told
только
you
что
about
по чатике
Chitiki.
рассказал,
It's a way
это
to get along
способ
peacefully.
мирно
This is the
уживаться.
zoning
Вот это
itself.
самое
In other
реанимирование.
words,
То есть
we have
мы
not mixed
не
everyone
всех
up,
вперемешку
but in one
поселили, а
area,
в одном
we have
районе
people
у
who
нас
like to
живут
sing in
люди,
chorus at
которые
night,
любят
gather
петь
and
хором
celebrate something,
ночью,
and in another
собираться и
area, there are
праздновать
those who
что-то. А в
like to
другом
sleep.
районе живут те, кто любит спать.
And everyone is
И
happy.
все
In other
счастливы.
words,
То есть
they don't
они
kill each
друг
other.
друга не
They don't touch
убивают,
each other
вообще
in any
никак не
way,
трогают,
because they
потому
don't
что они
interfere with
друг
each
другу
other.
не мешают.
They can
Они даже
even meet
могут
somewhere
где-то
the rest of the
в
time,
остальное
except
время,
at night,
кроме ночи,
and have a
встречаться
nice,
и
warm
мило и тепло
conversation.
беседовать.
And they live so as not to
А
interfere
живут
with
так,
each
чтобы
other.
друг другу не мешать.
The next part of the
Следующая
same
часть
question
этого же
is that
вопроса.
people
Люди
will
будут
gather in
собираться по
districts based
районам,
on
исходя
beliefs
из
and money.
убеждений
It
и
will be
денег.
impossible
Детям
for
в
children
маргинальных
from
районах
marginal
будет
areas
невозможно
to get out of
улучшить
them.
их.
A child is also
Ребенок
a
тоже
person.
человек.
If he
Если он
wants to
хочет
leave there,
оттуда
he
уйти,
has such an
он имеет
opportunity.
такую
He can't be
возможность.
held
Его нельзя
there.
там удерживать.
That is, other
То есть
districts
другие
may
районы
intervene.
могут
If you
вмешаться.
find out
Если
that some
вы
people in
узнаете,
another
что
area are
какие-то
being held
люди
hostage
в
there
другом
or
районе
are violating
удерживают
general laws in other
заложников или
ways,
иными
you may well
способами нарушают
intervene.
общие законы, вы вполне можете вмешаться.
In other words,
То есть вы
you You
можете
cannot say
сказать,
how they
как им
should
надо
live,
жить,
but you have every
но
right to say
сказать, что
that
они
they do
не
not
дают
allow
кому-то
someone to live
жить
the way he
так, как он
wants,
хочет,
and
и
at the
при этом
same
не
time,
дают
do not
уехать,
allow them to
имеете
leave.
полное право.
And exactly the same
И
help can also be
помощь ровно
targeted.
так же можно адресно
There's a
оказывать.
child
Вот
living
там
there who wants to get an education,
живет какой-то
for
ребенок,
example, to
который
work as an
хочет
engineer.
получить образование, например, работать инженером.
The society can
Общество ему
provide him with
вполне
this
может
business in
это
half,
дело
and it can
обеспечить,
even move him there
может
to a
даже это и
hostel or
селить
to some other
в
area if
общежитие,
he expressed a
в другой
desire,
район,
confirmed it,
если он
why not?
высказал желание, его подтвердил, почему
And in
нет.
the USA, by the
И в
way,
США, кстати,
it also
оно также
works. That
работает.
is,
То есть
even in
даже
closed
у
communities
закрытых
like the
общин,
Amish,
типа
who are
амишей,
cosplaying the 19th century
которые
there,
там
do not
косплеят
use the
19
benefits of
век, вообще
civilization at all.
параллель
You can
цивилизации не
officially get away
пользуются,
from them.
официально можно от них уйти.
That is, A
То есть
child who
ребенок,
was born
который там
there, he
родился, он
can leave
может
there if he
оттуда уйти,
wants.
если
It
захочет.
can also be
Его могут,
withdrawn
кроме того,
if it
изъять,
turns
если
out
окажется,
that they
что
do
они
not
какие-то
comply with
законы
any US
США в
laws regarding the
отношении
child.
ребенка не соблюдают.
But in general, it is
Но, в общем и
impossible to
целом,
forbid them to
запретить им
live,
жить, как
as
в
in the 19th
19
century.
веке,
That's how they
невозможно.
want to
Вот они
live.
хотят
You
так
can't do
жить, ничего
anything.
ты не
They can
сделаешь.
only be banned by
Запретить им
forcing
можно только
others.
других заставлять.
And this is being done
И это
successfully.
успешно
No, oh,
делается. Не, ну,
well, it's
понятно,
clear
что
that
когда
when
у нас
we have an
там
isolated
изолированная
community
община,
there,
они могут
they can
какие-то
hide some
случаи скрывать,
cases,
но их
but there are
явно
clearly
не
tens of thousands of them,
там
despite
десятки
the fact
тысяч. При
that
том,
these
что
Hamish,
этих Hamish,
according
по
to some
некоторым
estimates,
оценкам,
are
больше
more than a
миллиона.
million. It is officially written
Официально
that there
написано,
are
что
fewer,
меньше, но
but there
вот
are
есть
estimates that
оценки,
there are
что их
more than a
больше
million of
миллиона.
them. Cases of such
Случаев
cases are
таких,
all the
тем не
less
менее,
vanishingly
исчезающе
few.
мало.
In cities with
Но
this
в
kind of
городах
random
вот с
settlement,
таким
this happens much more
рандомным
often.
населением такое бывает гораздо чаще.
Therefore, in my
Поэтому,
opinion, yes,
на
it
мой
will lead
взгляд,
to
да, оно
zoning,
приведет к
but I don't see
районированию,
anything wrong with that.
но я не вижу в этом ничего
It's
плохого.
great
Это
that people
отлично,
can
что
group
люди
according
могут
to interests
группироваться по
and not be
интересам, а
obligated
не
from
быть
birth.
обязанными
That
от
is,
рождения.
you were
То
born
есть вот
here,
ты здесь
and that's it,
родился, и все,
you
ты
have to
тут
live
обязан
here
жить
and
и общаться
communicate
только
only
с
with
этими
these
людьми.
people, and it spoils
Это
everyone's
портит
life.
жизнь всем.
Well,
Ну,
except for those who
кроме
enjoy
тех,
the
кто
fact
некоторое время
that he forced
наслаждается
someone
тем,
for
что
a
он
while.
кого-то принудил.
But I don't feel
Но
sorry
их
for
не
them.
жалко.
Will the absence
Не
of
приведет ли
representative
отсутствие
power
представительной
lead
власти
to
к
the
концентрации
concentration of
власти у
executive power?
исполнительной власти?
As I said there,
Как я там
there should be no
сказал,
executive power
исполнительной
at
власти
all.
вообще быть не должно.
Therefore, we
Поэтому
skip it.
допускаем.
Right now,
А вот
cooks
сейчас
choose
кухарки
deputies
выбирают
without thinking more,
депутатов, не думая
without reading
побольше, не
literature,
читая
without
литературы,
asking
не спрашивая
specialists. As a
специалистов, в
result, they
результате
accept pension
принимают
reform.
пенсионную реформу.
Why would it be better
Почему
with a
при
direct
прямой
democracy?
демократии будет лучше?
They will be better
Они
vigilant.
будут лучше бдеть.
Well, damn,
Ну,
I
блин,
don't know the cook
я
who
что-то не знаю
accepted the pension
кухарку, которая
reform.
приняла пенсионную реформу.
In other words,
То есть
they
они
believed
поверили
some people
каким-то
that they
людям,
would do good to
что
them,
те
and they
им
voted for
сделают
them.
добро.
Plus, there were
И
also
они
fraud
за
in the
них
elections.
проголосовали,
That
плюс
is,
еще
not
были
everyone voted
подтасовки
for
на
them.
выборах, то есть далеко не все за них
And then,
проголосовали. И
these
вот потом
people
эти
adopted the
люди
pension
приняли
reform.
пенсионную реформу.
It was not
Прямой
accepted as a
демократии
direct
она не
democracy,
принималась.
and
Я
I
вас
assure you
уверяю, что если
that
вы
if you
сейчас
poll all the
опросите
cooks
всех
now,
кухарок,
you will collect at best
там в лучшем
1% for
случае
pension
1%
reform
за
there.
пенсионную реформу вы насобираете.
In other words,
То есть
they
они
are
бдят
already
уже
vigilant.
сейчас, у
They
них
do not have the
возможности нет.
opportunity. And if there was an
А была бы
opportunity, this
возможность,
simply did
такого
not
просто не
happen.
произошло.
What if the short-term
Как
effect
быть, если
contradicts the long-term
быстросрочный
one?
эффект противоречит долгосрочному?
To believe less in a
Меньше
fairy
верить
tale,
в
that's
сказки,
how to
вот
be.
так быть.
Almost always,
Почти
when they
всегда,
tell you
когда
that
вам
as a
говорят
long-term
про то,
effect,
что
so
это
now you need to grit
долговременный
your teeth
эффект,
there,
поэтому
something
сейчас
else,
нам
and
надо
they are
там
trying to
чистить
deceive
зубы,
you.
еще чего-то,
This
а
is
вас
exactly the
пытаются
same as
обмануть,
with
это ровно
secrecy.
так же,
That
как
is,
с
in
секретностью.
one case out of a thousand,
То есть в
it
одном
happens that this
случае
is
из
justified.
тысячи
And
бывает,
in this
что это
case, by the
обосновано,
way,
и в
it
этом
is
случае
obvious to
всем
everyone.
стать
In other
очевидно.
words,
То есть при
in a
прямой
direct
демократии
democracy,
все скажут, да,
everyone will say,
давайте
yes,
сделаем
let's
так.
do this.
То есть,
That
грубо
is,
говоря,
roughly
когда у вас
speaking,
еды на всех
when you
не
don't have enough
хватает,
food for everyone,
все
everyone will vote
проголосуют
it all,
вообще без
and without
проблем
any
за то, что
problems,
давайте
for the
введем
fact that let's
карточки и
introduce
будем
cards
некоторое время
and share food
еду
evenly among
равномерно
everyone
между
for a
всеми
while.
делить.
You don't
Вам
have
не
to
придется
convince.
убеждать.
It's just that when they
Просто
tell
когда вам
you
говорят, что
that
нам
we will have to
ближайшие
live in
30
this
лет
mode for
придется
the
в
next
таком
30
режиме
years
жить,
in order to beat
ради
everyone,
того,
and
чтобы
they are
всех
deceiving you.
переиграть, это вас обманывают.
Therefore, it is
Поэтому
good that it will
хорошо,
stop
что
working.
оно перестанет
It will be
работать.
harder to cheat.
Тяжелее будет
It's still
обмануть. Всё
possible,
еще
I
можно,
note,
заметь,
but
но
harder. What is
тяжелее.
the technology for
Какова
determining who
технология
the decision concerns,
определения, кого
but also
решение
for
касается,
distinguishing
ну,
which,
для
at what level,
разграничения
what is being
того,
voted
какие,
for?
на каком уровне за что голосуют.
Last time, I
В
think
прошлый
he
раз,
did.
по-моему, говорил.
There is no technology.
Технологии нет.
People gather
Люди
and divide the
собираются
spheres
и
by
разделяют
voting in
сферы
advance.
голосованием заранее.
There's no way you're going to
Никак
decide that
заранее
in
ты
advance.
решишь.
See in general the
Смотрите
previous
вообще
stream,
предыдущий
there was
стрим,
about
там
it in
про это было
detail.
подробно.
Well, in the 20th
Ну, в
century,
20
the people
веке
took over the
народ
country
взял, в
in such a
общем,
way
рулил
that we are
страной
still
так, что
sorting
до
it
сих
out.
пор
It is
распил.
dangerous for the
Опасно
people to
народу
take
брать
power.
власть.
Maybe not
Может,
everyone
не все
knows,
в курсе,
but the
но
decision about the
решение в
Soviet
Советском
Union
Союзе
was made by the
высшие
highest figures
деятели
of the Communist
Компартии
Party, and not by
принимали,
the
а
people
вовсе
at
не
all. The
народ.
people voted against
Народ
it in
на
the
референдуме
referendum.
как раз проголосовал против.
Then, however,
Потом,
the
правда,
questions were reformulated,
переформулировали
and the
вопрос,
people
и
voted
народ
slightly in
проголосовал
favor.
слегка
But you
за,
see, it
но
didn't
видите,
work
даже с
even the
первого
first
раза не
time,
сработало,
despite the
при том, что
fact
по
that
всем
on all
каналам
channels from morning to
с
night,
утра до
they
ночи
washed their
мы
brains
можем
about
по
how bad
поводу
it is
того,
for
как
everyone to
плохо
live in one
всем в одной
country.
стране
We just
жить,
need to
и
break it
надо
all up.
просто это все разломать.
And the channels, by
А
the way,
каналы,
were
между прочим,
controlled by the Communist
контролировались
Party.
Компартией.
Draw conclusions.
Делайте
It is
выводы,
dangerous
это
for people to take
народоопасно
it or
брать
some
или
kind of
какой-то
party,
партии,
arranged according to a hierarchical
устроенной по
principle, and on the principle of
иерархическому принципу и по
captation,
принципу
recruiting new
кооптации,
members.
набирающих в себя новых членов.
So now,
Так, сейчас.
probably there are some
Наверное,
more
еще какие-то
questions in the
вопросы
current
есть
stream,
в
but nevertheless, it is still necessary to answer some of those that were asked in advance, somehow alternate. Let's say there is a Tula house that interferes with everyone. A certain poet lived in the house who has a fan club in Omsk. The house is dear to them as a memory. Can these residents of Omsk vote against the demolition of the house? They can vote. Another thing is that people in Tula, and it may not be a light bulb. They are the same things in all countries, even without direct democracy. They are adopted at the level of federal law. That is, whether we will have museums reserves, cultural values in general. In other words, we say that we will have them, and they are under protection, and everyone knows about it. Then, knowing about this, people can vote, their elected representatives can. Usually they're elected representatives, because there is little direct democracy in the world. They decide which objects are classified as nature reserves and cultural heritage, and this is how this case is protected, and not at all because Vasya Pupkin said that some house there is dear to him as a memory. Well, listen, everyone grew up in some kind of house, well, almost everyone, right, and half of them cherish this house as a memory. Let's not rebuild anything at all, because everyone likes everyone. Well, if you don't live there, then it means that it's not so dear to you. If he is dear to us, take pictures of yourself, a three-dimensional model. If people don't think that this is some kind of genius figure, and his apartment is worth something there at all, one of the other, by the way, does not follow. Because, for example, I don't understand why we need a Dostoevsky or Turgenev house museum there. You go in there, there's a table, 2 chairs, but it's very useful to find out. No, I understand that the reconstruction of the life of the 19th or 18th century is quite worthy of being in a museum. But why is it connected with Dostoevsky? What does it matter to me that he was holding this fork in his hand, this chair? There was another part of his body on this chair. Some might be interested, but if most aren't, well, dudes, you're out of luck. You can take it, transfer everything to some other place, reconstruct the house there. You can transfer the whole house. Go to Kolomenskoye Park in Moscow, for example. There are up to a fig of houses that were transported from such a remote place in general. Here is an example of how to save. It would have collapsed there. They took it, moved it to the park. Do the same. With what ratio of votes will the decision be made? If 49 to 51% is accepted, will the second half be infringed? Well, of course there will be something to talk about. If a decision is made with a small margin, then it is clear that a lot of people do not agree with it. But the consolation is that, in a direct democracy, you have to lose quite a bit of your supporters in order to start winning the second half. In other words, they have a very good way to roll back everything in this situation. Either they will make sure that they have chosen not such a bad option, or others will make sure that not necessarily everything. Again, 1% is enough. If they are convinced that this option is not very good, but it was cancelled once, and changed to another one. Moreover, this attitude may change over time, so because of that, well, yes, I actually said that for this reason. It's not a bug, it's a feature. That is, all solutions in which there are 50-50, or there are equal shares, they are unreliable, because they seem to be unsuccessful to about half. Unsuccessful. And yes, it is quite logical that such decisions should be able to be stopped quickly, because this means that it is very likely that they were wrong. Even with desires, I'm not talking about technology. It is very likely that we have not guessed the desires of people. There is no problem here. On the contrary, it is like a solution, but the solution consists in this. And about the minority, I said a little earlier that you will not do anything. You will not forbid the adoption of discriminatory laws of direct democracy in any way. Another thing is that you will be, as it were, avenged for this. In other words, you have made a decision that let's go up to 30 years. Well, after 30, we sort of discriminate against everyone after 30. Someday you yourself will be over 30, and here you will understand the depth of your mistake. Really, when people have power, they are, well, very quickly unlearned to make such decisions.
отучаются принимать такие
Well, with
решения.
any discrimination of a small
Ну,
group,
вот с
it is
любой
necessary, as it
дискриминацией
were,
малой
every time.
группы
Well,
надо как бы
everyone
каждый
understands
раз... Ну, все
that you
понимают,
have
что
to
надо
think
100 раз
100 times
подумать, прежде
before you
чем
really make such a
действительно такое
decision, because
решение
the
принять. Потому
consequences
что
are very
последствия
serious,
очень
and this is not a
серьезные, и это
dictator.
не
That is,
диктатор.
it's
И до
easy to
вас как
reach
бы
you.
легко
It's
дотянуться,
easy for
вам
you to
легко
take
отомстить.
revenge, and you'll be
И
dealing
вы
with the
будете
consequences,
расхлебывать
not the
последствия,
people in the
а
ivory
не
tower
чел в
who
башке
won't
с
even
слоновой
notice.
кости, который их даже не заметит.
So, is it
Так,
worth doing a
стоит ли
delegation of
делать
votes by tags?
делегацию голосов по
Yes, it can
тегам?
be done.
Да, можно сделать.
Well, I was talking
Я
about
про
filters,
фильтры
yes,
говорил, да,
how to
как
fix the
ленту
tape. You can
фильтровать.
also
Можно
make a
также
delegation
сделать
by
делегацию,
topic, to say,
делегирование по
this is
темам,
what I trust
чтобы
to
сказать,
solve
вот этому
questions
я
on
доверяю
Roscosmos.
вопросы
I don't trust him on the
по
arrangement of green
Роскосмосу решать.
zones.
А по устройству зеленых зон я ему не
He
доверяю.
loves Mars,
Он
and
любит
there are no
Марс,
trees
а
on
на
Mars,
Марсе
so I
деревьев
don't
нет,
believe
поэтому
him.
я ему не верю.
Quite meaningfully,
Вполне
yes.
осмысленно, да.
Conditionally divide the
Условно
issues
разделить
into foreign
вопросы на
policy.
внешнюю
I
политику.
think
Ну,
that it
я
is
думаю, что
necessary
надо
to
именно
enter a lot of
вводить
tags,
много тегов,
that
то
is
есть не
not to
заранее
divide in
делить,
advance, because
потому
this is
что
really
это
a
реально
personal
решение
decision a person
персональное
makes.
человек принимает.
In other words,
То есть, да,
yes,
можно
it is possible to
статистически собирать
statistically
наиболее
collect the most
распространенные
common
теги,
tags,
чтобы
so that a
человеку не
person does not
приходилось
have to
самому
personally
лично
prescribe a
или
million
опытной
patterns
верности
himself. But
прописывать.
nevertheless,
Но, тем
this
не
is
менее,
not
это
what we
не
have
то, что
distributed,
мы
and
вот
only this way it
распределили,
can be
только вот
delegated.
так можно
That is,
делегировать. То есть
everyone can write
каждый
any
может
conditions
сам
himself.
любые условия написать.
It's just that we can help
Просто мы
him,
можем ему
and
помочь и
statistically make presents for
статистически
him
ему
to do
как бы
this.
пресеты сделать для
But you
этого.
can't
Но
calculate
это
this in
заранее не
advance.
вычислишь,
It's done
это именно
statistically.
статистически
That is,
делается.
we
То
look
есть
at which
смотрим,
tags
какие
people
теги
get,
люди
which are
заводят, какие
popular.
пользуются
We don't
популярностью.
look with our
Не
eyes,
глазами
but with a
смотрим, а
computer.
компьютером.
And so we find out.
И таким образом
Because
выясняем.
it
Потому
is
что это
still
еще
in
в
different
разных
societies,
обществах, разных
in different
условиях
conditions,
оно может
it can have different layouts.
разные расклады иметь.
Question. If the
Вопрос,
regions are
если
super
регионы
autonomous, then
сверхавтономные,
they can
то они
adopt
могут
laws
принимать
that are
законы
fundamentally
принципиально
unacceptable for
неприемлемые
neighboring
для
regions.
соседнего
How
региона.
then to get
Как
along in
тогда
one
ужиться в
country?
одной стране?
Stop going to visit each
Перестать
other.
ездить друг к другу в гости?
Well, yes.
Ну вот, да.
In other words,
То есть
if
если
something is
людям
so
настолько
fundamental to people,
принципиально что-то,
they can
они
accept
могут
it.
это
The fact that
принять.
they will
То, что
somehow
на
look
них
at
будут как
idiots
на
and not give
идиотов
them their
смотреть
hands
и
is
рутину
another matter.
выдавать, это другое
But the
дело.
thing here is that
Тут
they can
штука в
only
том, что они
accept it
могут
about
только это
themselves,
про
they
себя
can't about
принять,
others.
они не могут про
In
других.
other words, they
Они не
cannot
могут
accept
принять
and
и
prevent
другим
others
не
from
давать
leaving,
уехать.
because this already
Потому что это
violates
уже
federal
как бы
law, as it
федеральный
were.
закон нарушает.
Plus, some other
Плюс
things may
еще какие-то
contradict
вещи
federal
могут
law that
противоречить
does not
федеральному
concern
закону,
freedom
не
and direct
касающейся свободы
democracy.
и прямой
But here a
демократии.
person gives an
Ну,
example,
тут
yes,
человек приводит
in one
пример,
region
да, в
there is a
одном
drug
регионе
problem,
за
and in another
наркоту
there
вещают,
is
в другом
complete
полная
decriminalization.
декриминализация.
In
То
other
есть
words,
гипотетически может такое
hypothetically,
быть,
it
что
could be that drugs
наркотики
are banned at the
запрещены на
federal level,
федеральном уровне.
so no one can grow them in
Поэтому
their region.
никто их не может у себя в регионе
But
выращивать.
in most cases,
Но в
apparently,
большинстве
it will
случаев,
not be
видимо,
so.
будет
That
не
is,
так.
at the
То
federal
есть
level,
на
some mega
федеральном
extreme
уровне
option could
могут
be cut
какой-нибудь
off.
мега
Say,
экстремальный
well,
вариант
like this in
отрезать,
general.
сказать, ну, типа вот это вообще
You can't collect
там
nuclear
нельзя
bombs there and
ядерные
juggle
бомбы
them.
собирать и ими
But everything
жонглировать.
else,
Но всё
yes, you
остальное,
can have
да,
a
вы
gun at
можете
home
там
there,
пистолет дома
shoot it at
завести,
cans,
там
or you cannot do it.
стрелять из него по консервным банкам, а можете
In
не
other
делать
words,
этого.
it
То
is the
есть
right
это
of
вот
each
право
region
каждого
to
региона
decide.
решить.
As in the states in
Как
the
в
USA,
Штатах США, да,
yes,
там не
there
во
are not
всех
all
штатах
states that
оружие
allow guns,
разрешено,
but there are
но
some that
есть,
are
в
allowed.
которых разрешено.
They don't visit each
Они
other.
не ездят друг к другу
Yes,
в
they
гости?
seem
Да,
to
вроде
go.
ездят.
Apparently, this is
Видимо,
not so
это не настолько
fundamental, but with
принципиально.
slavery,
Вот
yes,
с
there
рабством,
was a
да, был
question of
вопрос
principle.
принципиальный.
The Civil
Но
War did
война
not start
гражданская не
because of
из-за
this,
этого
but this
началась, но
issue
этот
quickly
вопрос
came to the
быстро
fore.
вышел на первое место.
It was a matter
Это
of
было
principle.
принципиально. А
About the fact that this
про
is
то, что
not
это
bad,
не
I have
плохо,
already
а
said well.
хорошо, я уже
In other
сказал.
words,
То есть
it's
это
great when a
здорово,
lot of
когда
options are presented, and
много
everyone can
вариантов
choose where he is more
представлено, и каждый
comfortable,
может выбрать, где ему
and to live there,
комфортнее, и
and
там
to
жить, и
communicate with
общаться
those
с теми
people with
людьми, с
whom it is
которыми
more pleasant,
приятнее, а
and to
с
communicate
остальными
with others
общаться
less.
меньше.
In this way, to
Таким
maintain
образом,
good
сохранять
neighborly relations,
добрососедские
but at the same
отношения,
time, not to dance to
но при
someone
этом
else's
не
tune,
писать по
and not
чужой
to
душе
force
и
others to do
других
it.
заставлять это делать.
How will it work without
Как
the
она будет
internet?
работать без интернета?
There
Ну,
will be
так
no
никак
we.
не будет.
Consider that this only
Считайте,
works works with the internet. I'm even too lazy to think how to do it without the internet. Where will organized crime go when a region with a leader appears with bribery and threats, where drugs and prostitution are allowed? If a region with a leader appeared there, it is contrary to federal law. Drugs and prostitution, maybe not. But From the point of view of
С
this
точки
region,
зрения
it is not a
Таитяна она
crime.
не
Crime
преступность.
is taking away
Преступность — это
people's right
забирать у
to make a
людей
decision
право
by voting.
принимать решения
Wow,
голосованием.
this
Вот
is
это да, это
100% crime.
стопроцентная преступность.
The way the courts will
Так,
work
как
in
будут
direct
работать суды
democracy,
при
I
прямой
said about
демократии,
this in the
про это
report.
я в докладе сказал.
How will the mechanisms
Как
of
в этой
protection be
системе будут
arranged in
устроены
this system
механизмы защиты
against the
от
fact
того,
that the
что
delegation of
делегирование
votes would
голосов
not
не
degenerate over
вырождалось бы
time?
со
A system
временем
of
в систему
similarity of the
подобие
relationship of
взаимоотношений
ancient
миллионов
Roman
низких
clients with
клиентов с
patrons,
патронами,
where
где
rich and
богатые
influential
влиятельные
citizens will
граждане
be able
смогут
to push
продавливать
profitable
выгодные для
decisions for
себя
themselves.
решения, тупо
Stupidly
втайне
buying delegated
делегируемые
votes from a
голоса
bunch
у
of
кучи
beggars, don't
нищих
care, and
карьеристов
drunks?
и алкашей.
In general,
В
nothing
общем
right,
случае
but in
никак,
fact,
да, но
the
на
thing
самом
here is that with
деле
such a system,
тут штука
there
в
is
том, что при
fundamentally
такой
not enough money
системе
for this.
денег принципиально на это не хватит.
Because when you redeem
Потому что
votes,
когда ты
you buy them
скупаешь
from people
голоса,
to whom the same
ты
decision will apply,
скупаешь у
because
людей,
in
на
principle,
которых
all
это же
decisions are
решение
made by
будет
those to whom it
распространяться.
applies.
Потому что, в принципе, все решения принимают только те, на кого оно
If
распространяется.
you're with them at the
Если
same
ты при
time,
этом с
well,
них получишь,
you
ну,
intend to get a lot.
намереваешься очень
They
много
understand that
получить,
they will give you more than you will bribe them,
они понимают, что они тебе отдадут больше, чем ты их подкупишь.
and it is not profitable
И
for all of
всем
them
им
to do this.
невыгодно это
That
делать.
is, yes,
То есть,
you
да,
can fool
каких-нибудь
some half-wits
полоумных
in
ты
this way,
сможешь таким
but most of
образом
them don't,
надурить, но
because
большинство
they
нет,
understand it
потому
from the
что
very
они
beginning.
понимают это с самого начала.
Moreover, if they
Более
don't
того,
understand
если
it
они
from the
этого
very
не
beginning,
понимают с
they
самого
will
начала,
understand it
они
very
это весьма
quickly.
быстро
And
поймут.
this vote is
А
permanent. It's
голосование
not
у
that
нас
we have adopted a
перманентное.
law, and
Это
that's
не
it,
то, что мы
wait for the
приняли
next
закон,
vote,
и
to
всё,
recruit new
ждите
people to the
следующего
parliament so that they cancel
голосования, чтобы
something
новых
there.
людей в парламент набрать, чтобы они там что-то его
That's
отменили.
not right. I
Тут-то
don't
не
like the law
так.
here.
Тут
The
закон не
person took it
нравится
into account,
человеку. Человек
understands
понимает,
that he was
что его
deceived, he
обманули.
takes
Он
and
берет и
removes the
галочку
tick, and
снимает,
that's it.
и всё.
And how can one bribe
А каким
100,000
образом
people
так
so that they
подкупить
don't even take
100
off the
тысяч
ticks?
человек, чтобы еще они и галочки не снимали?
How can you make me?
Как ты их
Well, yes,
заставишь? Ну
you
да,
can
за
let your
троими
thugs in
ты
there for
можешь
3,
своих там
but for
молодчиков
thousands or
спустить, а
hundreds
за
of thousands.
тысячи или за сотни тысяч.
In other words,
То
it is
есть тут
technically
это
extremely
технически
difficult to do this
крайне
here,
тяжело
and
сделать.
therefore,
И поэтому,
naturally, it
естественно,
will
это
be
будет
very rare
очень
and
редко
very
и очень
short-lived.
ненадолго.
Well, that's how they
Ну, вот
bribed
так, что
someone.
подкупили кого-то.
Noodles to hang?
Лапшой
Yes, it's
навешать,
possible.
да, это возможно.
It's hard to bribe.
Подкупить тяжело.
How responsibility
Как в
for
этой
decisions is
системе
distributed
распределяется
in this
ответственность
system.
за принимаемые решения?
The Three Kopek project,
Двумя
Dank
голосами
won by
брать
2
одного,
votes to
победил
1.
трехкопеечный
They built
проект.
it,
Там
settled
построили,
it.
заселили,
A month
через
later, the
месяц
wind
подул
blew,
ветер,
the structure
конструкция
collapsed,
обрушилась,
and 30
и
piglets, new
30
settlers,
поросят
turned into a
новоселов
farce,
превратились
who will
в
be
фарс.
imprisoned for
Кого за
this.
это посадят?
First of all,
Ну,
they
во-первых,
somehow
они
entered
же
there, they
каким-то
were not
образом туда
forcibly
въехали,
imported
их
there.
насильно туда ввезли.
That is, if they
То
were
есть, если
deceived
их
about the device of
обманули
this
по
house,
поводу
then here is
устройства
a
этого
candidate
дома,
for
то
boarding
вот
you, the
кандидат
person
к
who
вам на
deceived
посадку.
them.
Чел, который их обманул.
If they were not deceived,
Если
they decided to
их не
take the risk
обманывали, они
themselves.
сами
They're right,
решили
but
рискнуть.
no one
Их
is to
право,
blame.
да, никто
That
не
is,
виноват.
they
То есть
told
они
us to build a
сказали,
house
нам
out
из
of
бумаги
paper.
домик
They built it.
постройте. Им
They're right,
построили.
yes, is an
Их
idiotic
право,
decision.
да,
Well,
идиотское решение.
idiotic,
Ну,
yes.
идиотское,
Maybe
да,
someone will
возможно,
die.
кто-то
Most
погибнет.
likely, after
Скорее
trying to
всего,
live in paper
попробовав
houses,
пожить
they will
домик
very
без
quickly
бумаги, они
realize
очень быстро
that the
поймут, что
decision was
решение
bad.
было плохое.
And about there, the
А по
question
поводу,
continues
там
further.
дальше вопрос продолжается.
Who will be appointed the scapegoat?
Кого назначат козлом
This is a very
отпущения?
true
Вот это
Freudian
очень верная
reservation,
оговорочка
because in
по Фрейду. Потому
reality,
что в
it's
реальности
usually not
обычно
necessary to fix
это
the
не нужно,
problem.
чтобы
It's
исправить
not so that
проблему.
people don't
Это
do it
не для
again
того,
later.
чтобы люди потом
This is
больше так
exactly,
не делали.
well, we have to
Это
pretend that we are
именно,
vigilant,
ну, надо
right?
же изобразить,
Therefore,
что мы
it is
бдим,
necessary
да.
to catch
Поэтому надо
someone
кого-то
and put them
поймать и
away. Whether
посадить.
something changes or not
Поменяется
is not
счет или
important to
нет,
us.
нам не
Whether we caught the
важно.
right one
Кого ли мы
is not
поймали,
important to
нам
us.
не
The main
важно.
thing is that
Главное,
at
что
least
хоть
someone has been
кого-то
reported.
отчитались,
Maybe
а
everyone
вот
will
все
forget.
забудут.
Sometimes they don't forget.
Иногда не
Yes, then the
забывают, да, тогда
politicians are there.
политики,
The
там,
judges,
судьи,
the police,
полиция,
the sheriffs,
шерифы, они
they have
имеют
big
большие
problems. A
проблемы.
number of
Про
good
это
films have
ряд
been shot
хороших
abroad
фильмов
about
снят.
this.
За
Naturally,
границей,
in
естественно, в
Russia it's a
России
bit
с этим
tight with this.
туговато
With
с
films,
фильмами,
yes.
да, вот
But in the
в
situation
самой
itself,
ситуации
it's
это
just
как
all
раз всё в
right.
порядке.
This is not the case
Здесь не
here,
так.
because decisions are
Поскольку
made by
решение
those people
принимают те
to whom
люди,
it
на которых
applies.
оно
Very quickly,
распространяется,
everyone will begin to understand what to think before deciding
очень
something.
быстро каждый начнет понимать, что надо думать перед тем, как что-то решить.
And you can't decide
А
for
за
others.
других нельзя
In other
решить.
words,
То есть
it is
нельзя
impossible to vote.
проголосовать, давайте
Let's
вот всех
move
в
those into a
соломенный
straw
домик
house.
переселим.
What will prevent a
Что помешает
consolidated group of
консолидированной
people
группе
from
людей
usurping the
узурпировать
decision-making
механизм принятия
mechanism,
решений
counterweights?
в
Well,
противовес
what's in the
тому,
way?
что помешает?
What will prevent you from
Что вам
establishing your
помешает
personal world
сейчас
domination now?
установить ваше персональное мировое
That is,
господство?
When the question is asked
Когда так
abstractly
вопрос
like that,
абстрактно
you don't even
задается,
know what
даже
to
не знаешь,
answer.
что
But
ответить.
probably,
Ну, наверное,
the resistance of others will
сопротивление
interfere.
окружающих
That's the
помешает.
same here.
Вот и тут так же.
If there are no
Если
delegates
по каким-то
assigned to any
вопросам
of the voting
голосующий не
issues,
будет
then
назначен
his vote simply
делегатов,
will
то
not get
его
into the
голос
voting.
просто не
That
попадет
is,
в
it
текст
will not be taken
голосования,
into
то есть не
account.
будет
Yes,
учитываться.
he will
Да, он
simply
просто
disappear.
пропадет.
What else are you going to
Что
do?
еще
Well,
сделаешь?
maybe
Ну,
he
он
doesn't
просто
want
не
to.
хочет,
He's shy.
стесняется.
Maybe he took the right of
Может, он
humility
принял
dinner.
обет смирения.
That is, he did
То
not
есть не
appoint a
назначил
delegate.
делегатов,
He did
сам не
not vote himself.
проголосовал, все,
That's
его
all.
голос
His vote
ушел
went
в
nowhere. And
никуда.
this technically
И это
means that the
технически
weight of the votes of all
означает,
the
что
others has
вес
slightly
голосов
increased,
всех
because his vote,
остальных
in fact,
чуть-чуть
was
возрос,
approximately
потому что
evenly
его голос
distributed
по
among all
факту
the others.
примерно равномерно распределился между всеми остальными.
He didn't
Он
participate.
не
This
участвовал.
happens in any
Так на
election.
любых выборах
If you didn't come
происходит.
to
Если вы
vote,
не пришли
you increased the weight
голосовать,
of the
вы
vote of those who
повысили
came.
голосы тех, кто пришел.
Although this is not
Хотя
legally
это
fixed in any way, it
никак
just turns out in
юридически не
fact.
закреплено, просто по факту получается.
Previously,
Раньше
the majority was
большинство
100
было
people.
100 человек.
Because you didn't
Из-за
come,
того,
the
что вы не
majority
пришли,
became
большинство
99.
стало 99.
Well, really there
Ну,
too should not
реально,
come.
двое
Well,
должны
something
быть.
like
Ну,
that,
примерно
yes.
так, да.
Correlation by similarity of
Корреляция по
voting
сходству
is
голосования
calculated
рассчитывается
only if
только
the
если
person
человек
votes
сам
himself
голосует, а
and
не
not the
делегат.
delegate. Well, maybe
Ну,
both.
может, и
In
так
other
и так. То
words,
есть нам
nothing
ничего не
prevents us from
мешает
counting a million
миллион
parameters, indicators.
параметров считать,
A
показателей.
person wants to
Хочет
count the
человек
correlation
считать
according to his
корреляцию
delegates.
по его
Maybe we can
делегатам.
even do it in advance.
Может,
It's not very
можем
difficult.
даже заранее это сделать. Это не очень сложно.
Well, there are
Ну,
really
там
3
реально
lines to
строчку
finish,
дописать,
and
и
here it
вот
will
оно
be.
будет.
Tell us more about
Расскажите
specific
больше про
cases on
конкретные
direct
кейсы по
democracy.
прямой
We need to
демократии.
talk to those who are
Надо
engaged in
беседовать с
this,
теми, кто этим
because
занимается.
otherwise we
Что
will
иначе
play
мы будем
broken
играть в
phones.
сломанные
They told
телефоны.
me
Они мне
something
вот
partially,
сказали
yes,
частично,
and they have
да,
it there
и они же
too.
тоже там,
They can't tell me
они
for
не
12
могут
hours straight.
12 часов подряд мне рассказывать.
They have told me a lot,
Сколько-то
and
рассказали,
suddenly
а
I will
вдруг я
retell it
расскажу
incorrectly
неправильно.
and do it
И
allegedly on their behalf.
сделаю
It will be
якобы
unpleasant
от
for
их
them.
лица. Им будет
In my
неприятно.
opinion,
А
it's
вот
not
это
very
не очень
healthy.
здорово.
That is, here's
Если
what I
то, что я
understood
хорошо
well,
понял,
I
я
riddled,
пересказал,
and
а
more
больше
details need to
детали
be asked them.
надо их спрашивать.
Here's someone we're going to
С кем-то
stream with.
будем делать стримы.
They will tell about their
Они
experience.
расскажут про свой опыт.
Last time,
Вы
you
в
didn't
прошлый
answer
раз не
questions
ответили
about
на
taking
вопросы
unpopular
о
decisions.
принятии непопулярных
I
решений.
answered today.
Сегодня ответил.
An unpopular solution
Непопулярное
is a
решение
euphemism,
– это
for we want to
эвфемизм
deceive
для
you.
«мы хотим вас обмануть».
What steps do you see
Какие вы
to
видите
level the
шаги
division
при
of
внедрении
elements of
элементов
direct
прямой
democracy in
демократии
the
в
current
текущей
situation?
ситуации
From a household
от
to an
домового
influential
хозяйства
political
до
force.
влиятельной политической силы?
If you have a team,
Если у вас
no, oh,
команда,
there
нет
is no
команды,
team.
нет у меня.
I have positive examples.
Позитивные
I
примеры
referred to them.
есть. Я на них ссылался.
What steps you take and
Какие
do.
шаги берете и
Fortunately,
делаете.
it's easy.
Благо, это
In other
легко.
words,
То есть
you
набираете
recruit a
группу
group of like-minded
единомышленников или
people,
создаете
or create a
фирму
company
или
or
еще
something
что-то,
else,
клуб
a chess
любителей
lovers
шахмат.
club, and tell everyone
Всем
gathered,
собравшимся
let's
говорите,
have a
давайте,
direct
у нас будет
democracy.
прямая демократия.
When everyone gets
Когда
used to
все
it, the
привыкнут,
transition will become much
переход
easier.
станет гораздо
Globally,
легче,
I mean the
глобально,
whole
я имею в
world.
виду всем
Until
миром.
people get
Пока
used to
люди
it,
не
and nothing
привыкли,
can be
ничего
done
с
about
этим
it,
не
there will
сделаешь,
be no
перехода
transition.
не будет.
In general, I also saw
Вообще,
questions about
вопросы про
transitions
переход
here
я
in the
тут
chat.
тоже видел в
They kind
чате,
of
они
flashed
как бы
by. But
мелькнули.
really, it's
Ну,
like fortune
реально,
telling
это
on
как бы
coffee
гадание
grounds.
по
It may
кофейной
seem to
гуще.
some
Кому-то
that
может
this is the most
казаться, что это
important
самый
question.
важный
How
вопрос,
will we
как
do
мы
it?
это
But
сделаем.
people,
Но
no one ever
никогда
knows
никто
exactly
не
how
знает,
one system will
каким
change to
способом
another.
поменяется одна система
In
на
other words,
другую.
all these
Эти
questions,
все
they are
вопросы, они
only if you
только
want
если
to
вы
bring a
хотите
person
человека
there
на
under the article
административу
so that he tells
привести,
you,
чтобы он
yes,
сказал,
we
да
will
вы
grab
сейчас
the
схватим
machine guns now,
автоматы, их там
we will
всех
put them all
положим.
there, and it
И
probably
это
won't
тоже,
work
скорее всего,
either,
не
but it will
сработает,
give him
но
a
зато к
reason
нему
to get to
будет
the bottom of it.
повод докопаться.
That is really, this
То
is
есть
fortune
реально
telling on
гадание
coffee
по
grounds.
кофейной
It is
гуще.
clear that in
Понятно,
any
что в
case,
любом
no
случае,
matter
как
how
бы
the
переход
transition is
не
made, yes,
делался,
propaganda
да,
is
нужна,
needed first of
во-первых,
all,
пропаганда,
and
во-вторых,
secondly, training.
тренировка.
Specific
Конкретные
ways, they
способы,
depend on the
они
situation at a
зависят от
particular time.
ситуации в конкретный момент
No
времени.
one will guess anything in
Заранее
advance,
никто вам ничего
and
не
no one
угадает,
ever
и
guessed.
никогда никто не угадывал.
Here people could hope,
Здесь люди могли
plan, and it
надеяться,
worked 3%
планировать,
of
и
the
оно
time.
срабатывало в 3% случаев.
That is, it follows
из
that
этого
planning
следует,
does not work
планирование
directly
вот
like
так
this.
напрямую не
At the same
работает.
time, time, having a project of what we want to do is very useful, because this part works. No matter how we move, if we have a project, it greatly increases the likelihood that we will do exactly this. We don't know yet in what way. Well, it's real. It's a question about how to transition. It's like asking a programmer, and in what order he will press keys or write lines there.
клавиши нажимать или
No
строки
one knows
писать.
in what
Никто
order.
не знает этого, в каком
A
порядке.
person will deal
С
with
этим
this on the
всегда
spot.
человек будет разбираться на
In
месте.
advance, he will
Заранее
think
вот он
about
будет думать
architecture,
об
algorithms,
архитектуре, об
pitfalls,
алгоритмах, о
but not about
подводных
the
камнях,
details, which
но не
line
о
will follow
деталях,
which one.
какая строчка за какой
But it's
пойдет.
just
Но
unrealistic.
это просто
This is when a
нереально. И
person
тут, когда
already writes a
функцию уже
specific
конкретную
function,
человек
he
пишет,
can
он еще
still
может
think about the
подумать
lines in
про строчки
advance, that there will
заранее,
be a
что
sixth
вот
one there
там
in
через
5
5
lines,
строк будет
and we
вот
need to prepare
шестая, и
for
надо
it.
к ней
That's right,
подготовиться.
that's
Это да, это
probably it. But
вероятно.
when you have
Но
10,000
когда вам
lines to
10
write,
тысяч строк
well,
надо написать,
it's faster to
ну,
write them than to
как
figure
быстрее
out
их
in advance how
написать,
to
чем
write them,
заранее
and in what
придумать, как их
order.
написать и в каком порядке.
In a direct democracy,
В
a
прямой
lot depends
демократии
on the
много
awareness
зависит
of
от
the masses.
информированности
How will the
масс.
information
Как будет
sphere be
регулироваться
regulated if?
информационная
Ah,
сфера,
well, by the
если...
way, a good
ну,
question.
кстати,
It was
хороший вопрос.
necessary
Надо
to
было
tell
вообще
about
отдельно прям
censorship
про
separately
цензуру
and about
рассказать и
freedom
про
of speech.
свободу
Here is
слова.
the key point.
Тут ключевой момент.
If we prohibit the
Если
dissemination
мы
of information on any occasion
большинством
by a
голосов
majority of
запрещаем
votes, well,
распространение
in general,
информации
we believe
по
that this is
любому поводу,
permissible.
ну, вообще
We have a
считаем, что это
very high
допустимо,
probability of fixing
мы
all erroneous decisions
имеем
for a
очень
very
высокую
long time.
вероятность все ошибочные решения закрепить очень надолго.
In other words,
То есть
in
для
order
того,
for
чтобы
people to
люди
change their point of
изменили свою
view,
точку
as soon as
зрения,
it
как
became
только
clear
стало
that the
понятно, что
decision was
решение
wrong, they
ошибочное,
must get this information from somewhere.
они должны откуда-то эту
Should I
информацию
tell them
получить, сами
myself, or
рассказать
should I
или
tell
им
them?
рассказать.
We don't know in
Мы
advance.
же заранее
We
не
just
знаем,
think.
мы
When I
только
vote,
думаем, я
I
вот
think
когда
this decision
голосую,
is
думаю, это
correct,
решение
but it's
правильное,
not
но
a
это же не
guarantee that it's
гарантия,
really
что оно
correct.
действительно правильное.
That is, roughly
То есть,
speaking,
грубо
I
говоря,
think
я
that this is
думаю,
a
что вот
fire-safe
это
house.
пожаробезопасный
And it
дом.
would be a shame to me
И
if
мне
it lights
будет
up
обидно,
100
если он
pounds,
загорится
but
100
if I
пудов. Но
forbid
если
to
я
report
запрещу
that this
сообщать о
house
том, что
caught
этот дом
fire, the
загорелся,
damage will be
ущерб
much
будет
greater.
гораздо больше.
This is from a purely
Это
practical
с
point
чисто
of view,
практической
right?
точки
From a
зрения,
purely
да,
moral
с
point of
чисто
view, what to watch,
моральной
what to
точки
read,
зрения,
what rituals to
что
send
смотреть,
is a personal matter
что
for everyone.
читать, какие ритуалы отправлять, это личное дело каждого.
If we forbid one
Если мы
accounting,
одному что-то
perhaps tomorrow they
запрещаем,
will forbid
возможно,
another,
завтра
and the day
запретят
after tomorrow
другому,
they
а
will forbid you.
послезавтра
In other
запретят
words,
вам. То есть
it is
лучше
better to agree in
договариваться
advance
заранее,
that
что
while it does not
пока
physically
оно не
interfere with
мешает
someone,
физически
right,
кому-то,
so
да,
far,
пока
it
оно
only
мешает
interferes
только
with the knowledge
знанием о том,
that
что
Vasya
вот
is
Вася
doing this at
дома
home.
таким занимается.
It is better not to
Лучше
touch
этот
this issue.
вопрос
Let
не
Vasya
трогать.
study.
Пусть
You
Вася
don't have to shake his
занимается,
hand
вашему
because
руку
you
не
never
жать,
know
потому
what he
что
does
мало
with
ли
this
чё он этой
hand.
рукой делает.
But as soon as you got
Но
there,
как только
you
ты туда
thereby
полез,
increased the
ты
likelihood
тем самым
that after
повысил
some time
вероятность того,
they would
что
climb to
через
you.
какое-то время полезут
Because
к
from the
тебе.
point of view
Потому
of
что с точки
someone,
зрения
here you
кого-то
are
вот
doing
ты
bad
дома
things at home,
плохим
and
занимаешься, а
Vasya
Вася
is
как
just
раз
fine.
молодец.
And in this regard,
И в этом
censorship
плане
is neither in terms of
цензура
information,
не
nor
в
in terms of
информационном
entertainment,
плане,
and
не
so
в
on.
плане
As there was entertainment
развлечений и
content,
так далее, как
popularization,
тут
there,
вопросы
everything like
было,
that in the question.
развлекательный контент, популяризация, там всё
And
такое.
all of this should
И
be
это всё
allowed.
должно
Who
быть
wants what?
разрешено. Кто
He
чё
looks at
хочет,
it.
тот
The
то и
only thing
смотрит.
that can exist in
Единственное, чё
such a
может
society
существовать в таком
is a forced
обществе,
warning about the
это
content.
принудительное предупреждение о содержимом.
But if a
Но
certain thing
если
is considered
какая-то вещь
shocking by most
большинством
people,
людей
they
считается
probably would like to know in advance that it
наверное,
will be
они
in
бы
a play,
хотели
or a
заранее
movie,
знать, что в
or in a book,
спектакле или
or in a
фильме, или
video,
в книге,
so that they
или
can
в
refuse
ролике
and
оно
not watch
будет,
this video.
чтобы иметь возможность отказаться и не смотреть этот ролик.
Because, well,
Потому
maybe
что,
they're
ну,
sick of
может
the
быть,
sight
там
of blood
тошнит
there.
от вида
Well,
крови.
why
Ну,
not, right?
почему
It
нет?
can be
Да,
like
может
this.
быть такое.
And to force all the
И
places where this video is
принудить
posted to show a sign in the
все
video,
места, где этот
there is
ролик
this,
выложен,
this. It's quite normal.
показывать табличку в ролике есть вот это, вот это, вот это, вполне
That
нормально.
is, then
То
the
есть
person
дальше человек
decides
решает, он
he
вот
wants
это, вот
this,
это, вот
this,
это хочет,
this,
или для
or it's
него
too
это
much for him.
чересчур.
We can just as well
Мы
force
можем
theaters,
так же там в
museums,
театре, музее,
anything
вообще
to
что
hang these
угодно,
signs there.
принудить вот эти таблички вешать.
But this is not a
Но
ban
это
on
не
freedom of
запрет на
speech.
свободу
On the
слова.
contrary,
Наоборот,
it is you
это
who tell a
вы
person that
человеку
he should
говорите,
become
что он
even more
должен еще
open.
более
That is,
открытым стать.
not
То
to
есть не
hide something,
скрывать чего-то,
but
а
to state it
сразу
right
это
away.
изложить.
To say right away
Сразу
that I'm
сказать,
going
что
to
у меня
have
вот
this,
такое
and
будет.
this thing is quite
И вот
normal.
эта штука
It doesn't
вполне
interfere
нормальная,
with
ничего не
anything,
мешает,
but it
но
just saves
просто
a number of
спасает ряд
people
людей от
from
каких-то
some unpleasant
неприятных ощущений,
sensations
которые
that
в
they
ином
might
случае они
otherwise have
могли
accidentally
случайно
experienced.
испытать.
And so they will not
А
experience.
так они не
Everything
испытают.
else is
Всё
not.
остальное
And
нет.
exactly the same
И
way, way,
ровно так
we
же мы
can't
не
limit them,
можем
as it says here,
ограничивать любых, как вот
charismatic
тут
bloggers
написано,
or some
харизматичных
popularizers,
блогеров
even if it seems to
или
us that they
каких-то
are just selling
популяризаторов,
face,
даже если
and
нам
their
кажется,
knowledge is very
что
low.
они просто торгуют лицом, а знания у них очень низкие.
Someone might want to
Кто-то,
watch
может быть,
this.
хочет смотреть вот такое.
The most that you can do,
Максимум, что вы
you can
можете
oblige the
сделать,
blogger to
вы
attach a sign.
можете обязать блогера прицеплять табличку.
Well, for example, he tells there that, well, I do not know, vaccinations should not be done. We decided by a majority of votes that vaccinations should be done, and let there be a sign hanging next to his video that this blogger has an original point of view, an explanation of why vaccinations are considered a useful thing by the majority of votes. You can read this link. And then the blogger, please, sets out all his considerations, whatever we are, no matter how idiotic we consider them, here. Relative financing, how the usefulness of innovations and adequate remuneration of those involved in them should be determined. And there's no way to determine it, except by voting. In other words, it's really more about the economy. I'm not referring to direct democracy, but nevertheless, it's also kind of about management here. You can't do anything. In other words, the only thing that can be done is to say, we will allocate 5% for experiments in various fields. What experiments should I conduct? But if a person does not need budgetary funds, he does anything for his own, not dangerous for others. If we decide from budget funds, by voting, they submit all their projects, we tell who to let it go. We can take it away at any time. If it turns out that this is a deceiver, but we take it from him, Lord, he will not receive it. If it turns out that he lied to us, yes, before that. Well, it wasn't just an idiotic idea that didn't work, and he knew that it was idiotic, but we demand part of it back from him. Or next time, we won't give him out of salary as compensation, right? Well, this is how it works now, but there is no way to guess what will take off and what will not take off. At best, with a majority of votes, we can hope that we will predict this case a little more often than with a random number generator, because, well, it is very likely that if a lot of people want something to be, it will probably really be in demand. And in general, nothing can be done about it. Only here is such an experiment, to say in advance that 5 to 10% of the budget goes to experiments, and then choose which of the enthusiasts to give them for these experiments. With the requirement, reasonable, yes, requirements that they constantly cover their activities. In other words, they wrote articles for public access about how they were progressing there, that they found out what was good, what was bad, what they had already built. Well, at the same time, we can also send some controllers to make sure that there, I don't know, an experimental reserve is really being built there, and not just tell us that it is being built. How to protect direct democracy from its own army and police. First of all, to make these institutions democratic. These people will have to issue weapons on duty. Here, the Swiss are given weapons, and not because of duty, but simply because they are all military obliged. And these weapons are stored at their home. And suddenly, none of them seized power, abolished direct democracy. On the contrary, I suspect it works in the opposite direction, that, probably, if someone wants to seize power, he will think 100 times whether to try to do it when everyone has weapons at home and they have all been training. Although this question is not a supporter of the conscription army, but this is a good argument in its favor. Well, without this, in the Soviet Union, this thing was tested repeatedly. There is a militia. It hypothetically has a weapon, but it lies sealed in some warehouse. In order to get it on your hands, either certain conditions must be fulfilled, in which, well, it is impossible to make a mistake. But it is impossible, as it were, to decide what it is when it is not. Well, roughly speaking, when you have tanks there in the city, you can't confuse them with non-tanks. Or write a whole bunch of papers, get a bunch of permissions there. Well, there in the USA, prosecutors sometimes issue all sorts of permits. In the Soviet Union, sometimes there are prosecutors, sometimes there are some local governing bodies. But in any case, just grabbing a gun and running with it into the street will not work. It's exactly the same situation here. It will be very difficult to organize the case so that the
делать
troops
так, чтобы
loyal
во
to
всей
some general,
стране
the future
верные
dictator, will
какому-то
receive weapons in their
генералу,
hands
бывшему
throughout the
диктатору
country,
войска
because no one
получили
person
оружие на руки,
specifically disposes
очень
of it.
тяжело будет, потому что ни один человек конкретно этим не
The
распоряжается.
best thing he will do
Самое
is to be
лучшее,
able to
что
get
он
weapons to
сделает,
employees in one
это
or
в
two
одном или
departments.
в двух отделениях сумеет сотрудникам оружие добыть.
If he won in all,
Если же
it
он
means that
добыл во
almost the
всех,
whole
это значит,
country is his
что
supporters,
почти вся страна его
and there
сторонники.
is nothing to
А
oppose.
тут уже нечего противопоставить.
Just say don't do that,
Только
don't
сказать, не
believe
делайте
dictators.
так, не верьте
Then you
диктатору,
won't brush it off.
потом не отмахаетесь.
Now I'll see if there
Сейчас
are any
гляну,
more questions in the chat.
появились ли еще какие-то вопросы в
It's
чате.
not all per set
Это
yet,
еще не все
it's half of
заранее
them at
заданы.
best.
Это половина из них в лучшем случае.
So, why are
Так,
bots such a
почему
difficult
боты
problem
такая
in a
сложная
direct
проблема
democracy?
при
You
прямой
can also
демократии?
send out a
Надо же
pin to
всем
everyone,
заслать,
which
а
no
то
one will
никто не будет
disclose.
разглашать.
The problem for us is
Но
not that
проблема
someone
не
will
в том,
vote with
что
your voice.
кто-то проголосует твоим
The problem
голосом.
is that people can
Проблема
get
в том,
virtual
что
voices for
люди
themselves,
могут
and
заводить
everyone else
себе
has one voice,
виртуальных
and they will
голосов,
have
и
30
все
or
остальные
100
имеют
because they
один
have spawned
голос, а у них
bots.
будет 30 или 100, потому что они наплодили ботов.
In other words, these
То
are
есть это
not
не
real people.
настоящие
They are
люди,
not
им
entitled
голос
to
не
a voice.
положен.
This is actually a thing
Это
with which one
фактически
person
штука,
has
при
usurped a
помощи
lot of
которой
votes
один
for
человек
himself.
себе узурпировал кучу голосов.
Virtual, right? But it's
Виртуальных,
not
да?
someone
Но это
specifically
не
he took.
чьи-то конкретно
He
он
just
взял.
created new
Он просто
ones,
новых
and thus,
насоздавал,
as
и
I said
таким
earlier,
образом, как
the
я уже
weight of
раньше
everyone
говорил,
else's voice
вес
decreased,
голоса
but
всех
his
остальных
increased.
уменьшился, а у него возрос.
The Soviet people never
Советский
ruled the
народ
state,
никогда не
even under
управлял
Lenin.
государством, даже
Their
при
party
Ленине не
ruled.
управляла
But
партия
no.
КГБ. Но нет.
If you don't agree,
Если
then
ты не
tell me
согласен,
why the
то скажи,
people were
почему
ignored
народ
when they
проигнорили,
chose the
когда он
left
выбрал
SARs.
левых
Well,
офицеров.
listen,
Ну,
well,
слушайте,
the
ну,
left
левые
SARs
эсеры
in the
в
20s
20-х
even ruled the
управляли
Soviets, but they had
даже
so many votes
советами.
that
Ну, у
some
них
Soviets were at their
настолько
disposal.
много голосов было, что некоторые советы в их распоряжении находились.
That is, it's not like
То
that
есть это
ever.
не так, что никогда.
In the 30s, yes, there was a
да,
big
с этим
problem with
была
that,
большая
but at first,
проблема.
the
Но
Bolsheviks did
сначала
not have a majority
большевики
everywhere,
далеко не
and their
везде
party
имели
officially
большинство. И
did not
партия
obey
РКБ
anything.
официально РКББ ничего не подчинялась.
In other words, they
То
were
есть
not
они
legally any
юридически
authority.
никакой
It was
власти не
then
были. Это
that the
потом
Communist Party
Компартия
began to be called.
начала
How is that?
называться, как это,
Well, like
ну,
guiding,
типа
state forming.
направляющие
I
государства.
forgot how it
Я
was
забыл,
worded.
как это
Well, like,
формулировалось, но
the
типа
main thing was
главное
fixed
было
here.
зафиксировано.
Officially, yes, but not in the
Официально, да, а
20s.
в 20-х нет.
You could be called
Вы
anything.
могли
If you have
называться как
chosen,
угодно, если
please.
вас выбрали, пожалуйста.
And even Lenin was not the
И
main
даже
one in this
Ленин в
regard
этом
at
плане
first.
сначала
He
был не
became the
главным.
main
Он
one
стал
when he
главным,
actually
когда
became a
фактически
minister.
стал
Well,
министром.
it was called
Ну, это
differently,
называлось
yes,
по-другому, да,
but
но
in fact,
фактически
he
он
became
стал
a
министром.
minister. That's when he had some
Вот
kind
тогда
of
у него
direct
какая-то
power.
прямая власть появилась.
They used pressure for
Они
this. They
использовали
used
давление
100
для
pounds, but
стопудов
then democracy
использовали.
still
Но
worked to a fair
тогда
extent.
демократия в изрядной степени еще
Have there ever
работала.
been an army with a
Были в
horizontal
истории
device in the
армии с
history?
горизонтальным
Oh, that's full.
устройством. О,
Listen
это
up.
полно,
But
слушайте,
any native
но
tribe they
любое
have like
туземное
this.
племя
That
у них
is,
вот так.
they are the maximum.
То есть
They
они
choose the leader.
максимум, они выбирают
And the
вождя.
leader, who does not
А
know,
вождь,
is not
кто
a
не
civil
знает,
title,
это не
but a military
гражданский
one.
титул, а
This is, in
военный.
fact,
По сути
the one who
дела,
will lead us
тот, кто
here.
нас в бой поведет.
And in this regard, he is
И
a
в этом плане
coordinator,
он
that is,
координатор.
he
То
cannot
есть он
order
не может
everyone.
всем
In most
приказывать.
cases,
В большинстве
not,
случаев
well, it's
не,
clear
ну,
that some mega cool
понятно, что
person
там
is there.
какой-нибудь
He can
мега-крутой
establish
чел,
his
он может свою
dictatorship,
диктатуру
but this
установить.
happens
Но это
once in a
бывает
thousand.
один раз
In
в
most
тысячу.
cases,
В
if he
большинстве случаев,
suggests
если он
doing something that
предлагает
others
делать
think is
что-то,
wrong,
что другим
at
кажется
best he will simply be
неправильным,
suspended,
в лучшем
and if he
случае его
insists,
просто
he will
отстранят.
also be
А если
killed.
он будет настаивать, то еще и убьют.
That is, when it is.
То есть, когда
You know,
это,
if you're going to
знаете,
go,
если
you
вы
know, on
собираетесь
safari
пойти,
or camping,
ну, там, на
you'll have a
сафари
guide
или в
there.
поход, у вас там будет гид.
That's right, organized
именно.
through a travel agency.
Организовано через
Come on,
турфирму.
you will have a
И у вас
guide.
будет
But
гид.
this does not mean
Но
that the
это не
guide is
значит,
in
что
charge of
гид
you.
над
He is
вами
the
главный.
organizer,
Он
yes,
организатор,
and the
да, и
coordinator, yes,
координатор, да.
but in
Вообще
general,
вы над
you are
ним
the main
главный,
thing
а
over
не
him,
он.
not him.
То
That
есть,
is,
да,
yes,
он
he will try
попытается
to make
сделать
sure
так,
that
чтобы
you
вас
are not
посажал
devoured by a
крокодил,
crocodile,
но он не
but he
может
can't
вам
tell you to
сказать,
do
а ну-ка
exercises
там
there,
делайте
or go to
зарядку,
bed
или
there.
там
It's
идите в
time to
кровать
sleep.
уже,
He is
спать
not your
пора. Он
commander.
не командир вам.
On the contrary, you can
Наоборот,
tell him,
вы
but let's
можете ему
turn off
сказать,
the
а
route
давайте
there.
там
He can
свернемся
refuse,
маршрут.
of
Он может
course,
отказаться,
because she has a
естественно, что у него
desire
есть
to
там
survive there. and he understands,
желание
yes,
выжить,
what
и
it
он
means to turn somewhere
понимает, да,
there.
чем это чревато, там,
Or
свернуть
he
куда-то,
may
или
have a desire not
желание
to spend additional
дополнительные
strength,
силы не
and for this
потратить у него,
reason,
может
he
быть,
will not
по
turn
этой
off.
причине он не
But it's
свернет.
not he who will tell
Но
you
это
where
не
to
он
go.
вам будет говорить,
He
куда
tells you
идти.
where to
Он
go,
вам говорит,
as
куда
long as
идти,
you
пока
agree
вы
to
на
it.
это
It's the
согласны.
same here.
Вот тут то же
There's a native
самое.
army by the year.
Туземная армия,
Yes,
какая угодно.
I
Я
will
больше
say
скажу,
more. In real
в
combat
реальных
operations,
боевых
there is
действиях
more of this command
вот
interaction than
этого
hierarchical.
взаимодействия командного его больше, чем иерархического.
Hierarchical. This is in
Иерархическое —
peacetime,
это вот в
when
мирное
soldiers
время,
have
когда
nothing to
солдат
occupy.
нечем
Yes,
занять, да,
let's have
давайте
generals
вот там у
there.
нас генералы будут.
Wartime generals
В
simply don't
военное
have the
время
information.
генералы просто не обладают
They, of
информацией.
course,
Они,
decide
естественно,
something.
что-то
Yes,
решают, да,
at the tactical level they can
тактическим уровнем, они
supply,
могут
and so on.
снабжением
They
заниматься
can
и так
deploy
далее. Они
troops
там
on the
могут
battlefield
расставить
there.
войска на поле
But
боя.
until very, very
Но
recently,
до
the role ended
самых-самых
there,
последних
because as soon as
времен
the fight
на
began,
этом
that
роль
was it.
скончалась, потому что как только бой начался,
At best,
все.
he can
Он в
shout
лучшем
and wave a
случае
flag
может
there,
там
send
покричать
a
и
messenger,
флагом помахать,
but there is
гонца
already
послать.
such a
Но там
mess
уже такая
that he does
кутерьма,
not
что он
have
не
information,
обладает
unlike those who are at that
информацией, в
point
отличие от тех,
and do
кто
not
в той
have the
точке
opportunity to
находится,
transmit
и не
orders.
имеет возможности передать
Moreover,
приказы.
as
Более
long
того,
as this
пока
order
этот приказ
goes,
будет
even with a
ехать
very
даже с
fast
очень
messenger,
быстрым гонцом,
everything
там
will
уже все
change there. In
поменяется.
some even computer
В некоторых
games,
даже
they try to
компьютерных
convey
играх
the
то же
same
самое
thing.
пытаются
That at
передать.
the beginning,
Что
you
вот
shot them
вначале ты
all
их всех
exactly,
ровно выстрелил,
then said
потом
go about
сказал,
there,
идите
and
примерно вот
after
туда,
that,
а после
your
этого
control
у тебя
turns off.
управление
Why?
отключается.
That's how it
Вот,
was.
вот так оно было.
Yes, now that
Да,
there is a
сейчас, когда
technological army,
технологичная
every
армия, у
soldier there
каждого
has an
солдата
earpiece in
там в
his
ухе
ear, and with a microphone, he
наушник и
almost
с
has a camera
микрофоном,
next to his
он
eye,
чуть ли не
through which you
камера
can see
стоит
what he
рядом с
sees.
глазом, через который можно посмотреть, что он видит.
Somehow it became easier to
проще
coordinate
стало
actions. But
координировать
again,
действия.
I
Но
don't understand if this is
я,
even
опять же, не
possible.
понимаю, возможно ли
Because
это вообще,
even in
потому
a
что мне
computer
даже в
game,
компьютерной игре
I
не
can't even look at the
получается.
10s or the
Даже
15s
за
there.
10 там, или за 15.
And 4000s, well, it's not at all. Therefore, this role is kind of overrated.
Поэтому вот, эта роль,
Simply
она
due
как
to
бы
the fact that a
переоценена.
person
За счет
sits at
того,
the
что человек
top,
сидит
he has the
наверху, он
opportunity to
имеет
appropriate
возможность
almost
себе
all the
присвоить
merits for
почти
himself,
все
to
заслуги.
say that's what I
Сказать,
did
вот это
well.
я
And it's
молодец.
true, he
И
can
это
really be
правда,
a
он
good guy.
действительно
He
может
may
быть
have done a
молодцом,
lot
он
of
может быть
useful
сделал
things.
много
The thing is that
полезного.
he's his own to
Штука
the
в том,
fact
что он
that
свой,
only I'm
потому что
good.
только я молодец.
Yes, it was
Но
a
это
flock
вот
of
было
sheep,
стадо
and
баранов,
I, as a powerful
а
shepherd,
я, как
led them
мощный
there to a
пастух,
bright
их там
future.
вывел к светлому
And as a
будущему.
rule,
А
this
как
is not
правило, это
so.
не так.
That is,
То
yes,
есть, да,
his
он
contribution
вклад,
may
может
be,
быть, он может
he
там
may have
вложился как
invested
100
there as 100
человек, но
people,
не как
but
10
not as
тысяч
10,000
уже.
already. How is it in Ian
Как
Online?
оно в EVE онлайн.
Almost the most socially
Чуть ли не
difficult
самая
game.
социально сложная
I
игра.
read partially.
Я
I
читал
didn't play
частично,
myself.
сам я не
There are a
играл.
lot of clans with
Там
their own
куча
rules,
кланов со
but due to the
своими
fact that it is
правилами,
very
но за
difficult
счет
to
того,
provide
что
power in this game, because everyone has
в
their
этой
own
игре
computer
очень
at
тяжело
home,
власть
they can take it and turn it
обеспечить,
off
потому
at
что
any
у каждого
time.
дома свой компьютер стоит, он может в любой момент взять и
And you can
выключить.
yell at him as
На
much as
него как
possible in the
максимум в
chat.
чате
In other
можно
words,
наорать. То
there is
есть
no
его
way to
принудить
force him.
никак
In other
нельзя.
words, he was
Если
attracted
ему
to the clan in which he
занравился
is a
клан, в
member.
котором он
He took
состоит,
another
взял
one
другой
and
и
left,
ушел.
and you
Он
won't do
ничего с
anything
этим
about
не
it. In
сделаешь.
other
То есть в
words,
жизни
it's
это
harder in
тяжелее.
life. But at the same
Но
time,
при
I do not
этом
know. I could not find
я не
information
знаю, мне не
about
удалось
clans
вот
with
найти
rigid vertical
информацию про
subordination
кланы с
there,
жестким
with
вертикальным
hierarchy.
подчинением, там,
I
с
have seen
иерархией. Я
information about
видел
the fact
информацию про
that
то, что
someone
кто-то
tried to do
пытался
such
такие
things, but
делать,
there were no willing
но
people.
что-то
Can
желающих
you
не
imagine?
нашлось. Вот
In a game that's
представьте, в
about war
игре,
and about
которая
trade, there's not even
про
something
войну
there
и
that
про
somehow wants to
торговлю,
integrate such a thing.
даже там что-то нет как-то желающих вот такое дело встроиться.
But these are foreigners.
Ну, это иностранцы
Well,
же.
many of them,
Ну,
yes.
многие из
Russians
них, да,
also
русские
play a
тоже
lot.
много
But
играют, но
foreigners do not understand
иностранцы же не
that they need a
понимают,
leader
что
there,
должен
a
лидер,
leader
там,
over
вождь
everyone.
над всеми.
Hierarchy versus hierarchy in
Иерархия
battle,
против
let's say,
иерархии в
gives
бою,
50-50.
допустим,
But
дает
maybe the
50-50.
hierarchy
Может,
always
иерархия в бою
defeats
побеждает
democratic troops in battle.
демократические войска
Maybe.
всегда.
Or maybe the
Может
other
быть,
way
а может быть
around.
наоборот.
Maybe, on the contrary, we
Может быть
haven't
наоборот,
checked.
мы же не
More
проверяли.
precisely, we
Точнее,
checked
мы
in
проверяли
computer
в
games,
компьютерных
and it
играх,
doesn't work
там
there.
оно не
But in
выполняется.
reality, no
А в
one
реальности
checked.
никто не проверял.
Because the only
Потому
clashes
что у
we
нас
had with the
единственное
conditionally
столкновение
democratic
с
armies
условно
were with the
демократическими
natives,
армиями
and there it
были
is
это
clear that the
Советский
technological level decides, and with the partisans.
технологический уровень решает. И с
And with the
партизанами.
partisans,
А с
the level of
партизанами
logistics
решает
decides.
уровень
That is,
логистики.
the
То есть
partisans are cut
партизаны
off from
отрезаны от
supplies,
снабжения,
but those who
а
are
те,
fighting
кто против
against
них
them
воюет,
are
нет.
not. And it's also
И
impossible to
тоже
sort of
нельзя
measure how it
как
really
бы
is.
соизмерить, как оно на самом деле.
So, why don't
Так,
you promote these
почему
ideas to a
не
wide
продвигаете
audience?
эти идеи на широкую
Well, I'm
аудиторию?
promoting it.
Ну вот, продвигаю.
How is a conflict of the
Как
type of
решается
sorction
конфликт
resolved in
типа
terms of execution, provided that execution is possible only with the participation of 100% in the execution? If there is such a
Есть
law,
ли
well, about
такой
the fact that it is impossible, for
закон,
example, to
ну, по
keep
поводу
people in
того, что
slavery,
взять, например, людей
then
в
yes,
рабстве
all
содержать,
100% will
то
have to
да,
be
тут
executed
придется
here,
исполнять всем
because it cannot be that
100%,
60% of
потому
them
что
do
не может
not
быть
keep
так, что
slaves, and the remaining
60%
40 seem to
они
keep
как бы
them.
не держат рабов, а остальные 40 как бы держат.
The question here is, who are they
Тут вопрос,
holding?
кого
Yes,
они держат, да,
probably someone
наверняка
from those
кого-то из тех
60.
60.
But, in a lot of
Но
other
в
things,
случае
in
других
almost all,
вещей,
I would even say,
почти во
40 to
всех, я бы
60
сказал
is
даже,
quite normally solved. We
40
just
на
don't force
60
these
вполне
40% in
нормально
any way.
решается, просто
We
мы
don't
эти
call.
40% не принуждаем никак, не зовем.
We want to build a
Мы
spaceship.
хотим построить космический
There are
корабль.
some people who say
Есть
that their
какие-то люди,
religion
которые
forbids
говорят,
them
что
to
им
fly into
религия
space,
запрещает в
but why
космос
should we
летать.
call
Ну
them?
зачем
Well,
им их звать?
hypothetically,
Ну,
they can be
гипотетически их
forced.
можно
Yes,
принудить,
but
да,
what will it
но
give
а
us?
чё нам
They will
эту даст?
sabotage
Они
the
будут
work. In other
саботировать
words,
работу. То есть они
they will do less
полезного
useful.
сделают
Then we will spend
меньше,
resources
чем мы
on what they can
потратим
make it do.
ресурсы на то, чтобы их заставить это
The
сделать.
question is why.
Вопрос
It's better
зачем?
to take it
Лучше
always like
взять,
this.
всегда это
In most
так, в
cases, it's like
большинстве
this. It is better
дел
to
это
take
вот
those
так.
who want to do
Лучше
it
взять
and
тех, кто
create the
хочет
most
это сделать,
comfortable
и
and
создать
pleasant
ему
conditions for
максимально
him.
комфортные и
He'll do it
приятные
for
условия.
you,
Он
and
вам
it will be
сделает.
much
И
cheaper
это будет
than if you
гораздо
forced
дешевле,
someone.
чем если вы кого-то заставляли.
And almost always so,
И
and
почти
sometimes
всегда
not so.
так.
Yes,
Иногда
but
не
there will
так,
have to
да,
be
но
forced
там
somehow.
придется как-то
But these are
принуждать.
very
Но
rare
это очень
questions,
редкий
even in
вопрос.
terms of singing
Даже
or
в
not
плане
singing at
петь
night.
или не
As
петь
I gave an
по
example
ночам,
here,
как
the
я тут
question is
приводил в
solved
пример,
simply by the fact
вопрос
that we have
решается
two
просто
districts.
тем, что у
In
нас
one they
два
sing,
района. В
in the
одном
other they
поют, в
don't,
другом
and
нет.
it is not
И не надо,
necessary,
опять же,
again,
все
to force
100% к одному
100% to
варианту
one option.
принуждать.
What is Bitcoin?
Что такое биткоин?
Read Wikipedia, it's
Почитайте
well told there.
Википедию, там хорошо рассказано.
So, about zoning,
Так,
it
про
was my donation.
регулирование, я
I
думаю,
meant
мой
even
донат,
Nemisha,
я имел в
and a
виду
bad
даже
old
не
social
нищие, а
inequality.
старые,
There will
недовольные
be rich
социальное
areas,
неравенство,
and there will be
будут
poor
богатые
ones.
районы, а
The
будут
children of the
бедные.
poor
Дети
are not to
бедняков не
blame,
виноваты,
that they
что
are the
они
children
дети
of the poor,
бедняков, а
and there are very
бедность
few
выбраться
opportunities
из
to
круга
get out of the
бедности
circle of
очень
poverty.
мало.
Of course,
Безусловно,
but
но
the thing
штука в
is, as
том,
I
что,
said,
как я уже
they
сказал,
can't be
их
kept
нельзя
there.
там
That is,
удерживать.
in
И в
whatever
каком
area
бы
they
районе
live,
они
they
ни
will still
жили,
have
а
to provide
социальную
social
помощь им
assistance.
все равно придется оказывать.
In other words,
То
there
есть
can be a
проблема может
problem
быть только
only
когда
when
им
they are not
оттуда не
allowed to get
дают
out of there.
выйти.
And so, well,
А
it's
так,
not their
ну, они
fault,
не
but what
виноваты,
can
а
you do
что с
about
этим
it? I
сделать?
have offered such
Я
options.
предлагал
Many
такие
are very
варианты,
afraid of
многие
it.
это очень
How to
боятся.
do something like
Что как бы
voluntary boarding
сделать
schools,
что-то
where a
типа
child can come
добровольных
at any time
интернатов,
and live there for some time.
куда ребенок в любой момент может прийти и сколько времени,
In other
сколько-то
words,
времени там
no
пожить.
decision is
То есть для
needed
этого
for
не
this.
нужно никакое
He does not
решение,
need the
ему не
consent of
требуется
his
согласие
parents. It's
родителей.
just that this
Просто
is his
вот его
right.
право.
There are special people there
Там
who will
есть
feed him there,
специальные люди,
clothe him,
которые его будут
check his health.
кормить, там, одевать, здоровье его проверять.
Well, a lot of
Но
people
куча
are
людей
afraid.
боятся.
What
А
if my
вдруг
children
мои дети
foolishly go
туда
there?
по
I
глупости
say it's
уйдут? Я
voluntary.
говорю, так
They
как же
can come back
добровольно,
at
они
any
могут
time.
в любой
If they
момент
left
вернуться,
stupidly
если они
and then
ушли
changed
по
their mind the
глупости,
next
и
day,
потом на
so
следующий
they will
день
come the
передумали,
next
так
day.
на следующий день
And
и
so it's
придут.
good.
А
They
так
stayed away
хорошо,
from
они
you
вдалеке
and
от вас
calmed down,
побыли, и
moved away.
успокоились,
So he would have
отошли.
run away
Так вот
and
он
spent the night
сбежал и
somewhere under a
где-нибудь
railway
там
crossing, right,
переездом бы
under a
ночевал,
bridge
да,
somewhere.
под мостом
And here he
где-нибудь.
was in the
А
house,
здесь он был
warm
в
and
доме, в
safe.
тепле, в безопасности.
There's also someone to talk to,
Еще
right.
и поговорить
That is,
есть
in
с кем,
general,
да, то есть
great.
вообще
No,
слушать.
oh. But I'm
Нет,
still
а я
afraid
всё
that the
равно
child
боюсь,
will
вдруг
leave
от меня
me. I
ребенок
look at it,
уйдет.
I
Я
think,
на это
damn,
смотрю,
maybe.
думаю, блин, а может,
Well, as if this argument
ну
is
как
not
бы этот
against,
довод
but
не
for it
против,
turns
а
out,
за
what are you going to
получается.
do with
Что
a
ж ты
child
такое с
if you are
ребенком
afraid that,
сделаешь,
at the
если
first
боишься,
opportunity,
что
he
при
will
первой
leave you?
возможности он от тебя
Maybe the
свалит?
child is really
Может, на
bad
самом
with you,
деле
even
ребенку
if
с
you are
тобой
already thinking that
плохо,
he will get
если
away
даже
from you.
ты уже думаешь о том, что он от тебя свалит.
Here is the same
Вот
situation.
тут та же
There
самая
is a boarding
ситуация.
school.
Есть
There are
интернат,
poor
есть
people's
дети
children,
бедняков.
so
Вот
they
им не
don't like their
нравится их
surroundings.
окружение.
They
Они
take
берут
and
и
go to this
уходят в
boarding
этот
school,
интернат.
while the kids, right,
Пока
when they
дети,
are
да,
adults,
когда они
they can
взрослые,
just
они
move
могут просто
somehow.
переехать как-то.
And while the children go to this
Пока
boarding
дети
school,
уходят в
their
этот
parents cannot
интернат,
forbid them.
родители им
It's like a
запретить не
federal
могут. Но
law
уже как бы
that children
федеральный
have such a
закон, что у
right.
детей такое право есть.
It helps somehow,
Это
but
как-то
it's guaranteed.
помогает.
Well,
Но
there's also an
гарантированно,
unconditional income
как
there.
еще там
But
безусловный
if
доход
children
есть.
are
Но
deprived
если
of
дети
receiving money
лишены
and depend
получения
on their
денег и
parents,
зависят от
parents will still
родителей,
be able
родители
to
все
force
равно
them.
смогут
That
их
is,
принудить.
here
То
in
есть
any case,
по-любому
the
вопрос
issue is
решается
resolved
через
through some
некую
kind of organization for
организацию
children
для
of
детей
independence. The
независимых.
older they
Чем
are,
они
the more
старше, тем
legally
более они
independent they are.
независимы именно
And yes,
юридически.
there, from some point
И
on,
да, там с
you can
какого-то
also start
момента
giving
можно
out
детям
unconditional
безусловный
income to
доход тоже
children. It's
начинать
just not there in
выдавать. Может,
full,
там не в
because they have
полном
less
объеме,
costs,
потому что у них
right?
затрат
But he
меньше,
adds
да,
a little
но
bit,
по
so
чуть-чуть
that they get used to
чтобы они
it
к
and
этому
do not
привыкли.
depend on their
И не от
parents.
родителей не
And at the same
зависит.
time,
А
parents are
родителям при
forbidden to
этом
take this
запрещать у
case
них
away
это
from
дело
them. This
отбирать.
is also a
Вот это
federal law
тоже
there that
федеральный
parents
закон, что
cannot
родители
withdraw
у
it
них
from
это
them
изъять не
because they
могут,
did
потому
not
что
give
это
it to
не
them,
они им
but
дали, а
society gave it
общество
to children.
дало детям.
Something like that.
Как-то
Well,
так,
this is
но
generally a separate issue.
это вообще
It is
отдельный
not
вопрос.
directly related to
Кстати, с
direct
прямой демократией
democracy.
это напрямую
This
не
is also
связано. Это
connected with the
связано
structure of the
тоже с
society of the
устройством
future,
общества
but in a
будущего, но
different way.
как-то иначе.
If the cooks are already
Если
vigilant,
кухарки уже
why do they
бдят,
vote for
почему они
United
все
Russia
время
all the
голосуют
time?
за Единую Россию?
Because this is representative
Такова
democracy.
представительская
With her,
демократия.
people can
При
always
ней
be
людям
told that
всегда
you
можно
know, the
рассказывать,
Tsar is
что вы
different from the
знаете,
boyar's
царь
goats.
отличный от бояры
And the
колдуны.
boyars are also
И
cool.
бояре
But the
тоже
State Department has
клевые, но
passed
это
these laws
Госдеп
to
нам
us.
эти
The State
законы принял.
Department pushed through pension
Протолкнул
reform. These
пенсионную
bastards.
реформу Госдеп, вот сволочи.
We need to choose even
Надо
more
еще
people from
больше
United
Единых
Russia,
Россий
and then we will definitely be
выбрать
able to
людей,
resist
и
the State
тогда
Department
точно
and
сумеем
cancel the pension
сопротивляться
reform.
Госдепу и отменим
And you
пенсионную
can't check it
реформу.
in any
Никак не
way,
проверишь,
because there is no
потому что
lever.
рычага-то
It is a
нету.
very long route,
Очень длинный
and not
маршрут,
everyone can
и
realize
каждый
it.
человек
But
может
more
его
than that,
осознать.
I,
Но
for
более
example,
того,
am
я,
aware of
например,
it,
его
but I
осознаю,
still
но
won't be able
управлять
to
я им всё
control
равно
it.
не
I don't
смогу.
have
У
any
меня нету
recipe
никакого
how to make
рецепта, как
sure that this
убедиться, что вот
deputy
этот
will really
депутат
do what
будет
I
правда
want.
делать то,
And
что я
all the
хочу.
more so because
И
he will
тем
be in the
более, что он
majority.
окажется
I
в
don't have this.
большинстве.
I
Этого у
can
меня нет. Я
perfectly
могу
understand
отлично
how it
понимать, как
works.
это
Well,
устроено, но
and
и
not that in spite of
не
this,
то
but
чтобы
because of
несмотря
this,
на это,
I
а
understand that this is
благодаря этому я
unattainable.
понимаю, что это
In this
недостижимо.
system, I
В этой
really have very
системе
little
реально
control capabilities.
очень малые возможности для контроля
That is
ими.
as a maximum.
То есть как
If we had
максимум,
this
если бы
current
у нас эта
parliamentary democracy,
демократия
yes,
парламентская
representative, if
нынешняя,
it
да,
worked fully without
представительская, если бы она
fraud,
работала
and in all
полноценно,
spheres,
без
at least we
подтасовок
could
во
not
всех
let
сферах,
corrupt officials and bandits in
хотя бы
there.
мы могли бы коррупционеров и бандитов
At
туда не
least,
пускать.
but that doesn't
Хотя бы.
mean
Но это
that
не
there would be
значит, что
smart
были бы
people there who
умные
are
люди,
incorruptible
которые
and
там
all that.
подкуплены
Just
и
the
всё
obvious
такое.
ones would have
Просто
been
явно
removed,
бы
but
убрали.
this is the
Но
maximum
это
for
максимум для
representative democracy.
представительской
It's
демократии.
good,
Это
yes,
хорошо, да, это
it's
лучше,
better
чем
than
диктатура,
dictatorship,
но это
but it's
хуже,
worse
чем
than
прямая
direct
демократия.
democracy. Why was it necessary to
Зачем нужно
adopt
было
pension
принимать
reforms
пенсионные
now,
реформы
if it
сейчас,
was
если это
argued that in
аргументировали
20
тем,
years the
что
money would
20
run out?
лет деньги
Listen,
кончатся?
well, Dem,
Слушайте,
in
ну,
all
блин,
countries
во
of the
всех
world,
странах
yes,
мира,
where
да, где
pension
сейчас
reform has now
приняли
been adopted.
пенсионную
Russia is
реформу,
not the
Россия,
only
она же не
one.
одна
It was
такая.
based on the fact
Она
that the
базировалась на
majority of
том,
the rich became
что
richer more slowly because of all
большинство
sorts of
богатых
crises and so
стали
on.
медленнее богатеть из-за всяких там кризисов и так далее.
One of the reasons is
Одна из
because there are a
причин,
lot of
потому
social
что очень много
guarantees. It's
социальных
not enough that
гарантий.
we pay
Мало
these
того, что мы
bastards a
платим
salary, and
этим
not like in
гадам
the 19th
зарплату, не
century,
как в
but
19
already
веке, а уже
normal. Yes,
нормальную,
there.
да, там,
Big, really.
большую, реально.
In the outfit of
В
enterprises,
наряде
the owner,
предприятий
he is poorer than his
собственник,
best
он
employees.
беднее, чем самые лучшие его
It's a
работники.
very common thing in the
На
West.
Западе весьма
Not
распространенная
by orders
штука.
of
Не на
magnitude, of
порядке,
course,
естественно,
but it
но
can be a little
чуть-чуть, может
poorer.
быть, беднее.
So, it's not
Так
enough that
вот,
this, there
мало
are
того,
also
что вот это
deductions to
еще
taxes from
отчисления в
enterprises,
налоги с
right?
предприятий идут,
And then
да?
taxes are
А
spent.
налоги
There is no
потом
way to
тратятся,
prove,
нет бы
well,
доказать,
say, the tile from the right
ну,
person.
скажем, плитку у нужного человека.
Instead, they
Они
take and
вместо
give
этого
someone a
берут и
pension,
кому-то
and
дают
pensioners,
пенсию. И
instead of
пенсионер
going and
вместо того,
buying a
чтобы пойти и
tile,
купить
go and
плитку,
buy
идет и
sausages,
покупает
and as a
сосиски. И в
result, the
результате
money
деньги
went to the wrong
достались не
person.
тому.
It is necessary to stop
Надо
this
этот
mess,
бардак
fill the budget
прекратить,
in this way.
наполнить
In other
таким
words,
способом
it's
бюджет.
not
То есть
because
не
the
важно,
money ran
деньги
out.
кончились.
Money can
Деньги
always be
деньги
printed.
всегда
Money
можно
never
печатать.
runs
Деньги
out.
никогда не кончаются.
This is a way to somehow
Это
return the
способ
previous
каким-то
distribution
образом
that was.
вернуть прежнее распределение,
In other
которое
words,
было.
it's
То
such
есть
a
это
purely
такое чисто
reactionary thing.
реакционная
In other
штука.
words, we will
Мы
try to
попытаемся
stop
таким
social
образом
progress in
остановить
this way,
социальный прогресс,
artificially keep
искусственно
stratification.
удержать расслоение.
But it's not about direct
Но это не про
democracy.
прямую
It's just
демократию,
about
это
how it
просто про
happens,
то, как
right?
оно происходит, да?
How can I drop a link to
Как
the
скинуть
existing
ссылку
implementation of the
с
described
реализацией
democracy?
описанной
Well,
демократии?
you can send it.
Ну, можете
I'll see if it's
прислать, я
normal. I'll put it in the
посмотрю, если
comments.
это норм, положу в
Not in the
комментах,
comments,
в
in the
комменты,
description.
в описании.
Well, in any
Ну, в
case,
любом
it
случае, в
doesn't
чат
make
её
sense
не
to
имеет
send her to
смысла
the
слать,
chat.
её лучше в
It's better to
комменты
send her to the
прислать.
comments, because she
Потому
will
что в чате
leave in the
она
chat.
увидит, потом
Then
будет
no
больше
one
не
will find
найдёт.
her anymore. So no one will want to build nuclear
Так
power
никто
plants
себя
at
не
home,
захочет ядерной
so so there will be no nuclear power. And maybe it's right. But if no one wants to build nuclear power plants at home, why do we choose Red and arrange it for him? At the same time, it's not good. If you find people who say, oh, we agree that we will have a nuclear power plant, but you will pay us extra for harmfulness. If you found such, that's it. Okay, that's fair enough. We tried Sage, mass open source alternative for Wolfram math.
Open source альтернатива для
I've only
Wolfram
seen it,
математики. Я
but
это
of course
видел.
it's such a conditional
Но она,
alternative.
конечно, такая
That
условная
is,
альтернатива.
better
То
than
есть лучше,
nothing,
чем
but
ничего,
worse than
но
tungsten,
хуже,
than
чем
noticeable.
Wolfram, чем заметно.
And this wasn't a topic.
Это был off-topic.
What other conditions besides
Какие
the
еще
internet
кроме
are
интернета
necessary for
необходимы
direct
условия для
democracy?
прямой
Is it
демократии?
possible under
Возможно ли она при
capitalism,
капитализме,
where the
где
employee
сотрудников
magnet decides
магнит
bonuses?
решает премии?
Desire. The only necessary
Желание,
conditions,
единственное
other than
необходимое
the
условие,
internet,
кроме
depend
интернета,
on the
это
desire of
желание
people to
людей
be in this
в этом
business.
деле
About the
состоять.
elections. Do you agree
Насчет
with those
выборов,
people
согласен ли вы с
who
теми
advise
людьми, которые
sabotaging the
советуют
elections in the
саботировать
current
выборы
realities?
текущих
And it doesn't
реалий?
matter at all. In other
Это
words,
вообще
it
все
doesn't
равно, то
affect
есть это ни на
anything.
что
You
не
can
влияет. Вы
participate in
можете в
them,
них
you
участвовать,
cannot
можете не
participate. If you
участвовать.
don't have a
Но если у вас
megatest
нету
candidate, and there are sometimes such
мега-протестного
candidates,
кандидата,
it doesn't
а
matter if
такие
you
иногда
participated
бывают,
or not.
все равно вы участвовали или
Because when
нет.
you have, as it
Потому что
were,
когда у
the
вас
only
как
correct
бы
dictator and spoilers, it doesn't matter what you will
единственный
do.
правильный диктатор и спойлеры, все равно что вы будете делать.
It's another thing if you
Другое
have
дело, если
dictators,
у вас
someone who can spoil
диктатор и
raspberries
кто-то,
for him.
кто может ему испортить
That's
малину.
how it can work.
Вот так может
Yes, you
сработать.
can
Да,
go to
можно
vote
пройти
so that,
проголосовать
well, first of all,
для того,
everyone knows
чтобы,
that they are not
ну, во-первых,
alone.
все
Yes,
узнали,
that
что
there
вы
are
не
many of
одни,
them.
да, что таких
Secondly,
много.
it will greatly
Во-вторых, это
complicate
сильно
all sorts
осложнит
of
всякие
fraud
там
and so on.
подтасовки и
And
так
thirdly,
далее.
the
В-третьих,
reaction of
реакция
the international
международного
community is
сообщества
possible.
возможна.
But if there is,
Но
say, a representative of
при
some party in
наличии,
power and spoilers, it doesn't matter what you do.
скажем, представителя какой-нибудь партии власти и спойлеров, все равно, что вы
How is
делаете.
direct democracy
Как
combined
сочетается
with a
прямая
planned
демократия с
economy?
плановой
It was in the
экономикой?
streams.
В стримах было.
So well, I answered
Так,
many
ну,
questions from
я
the chat.
ответил на многие вопросики из чатика.
Oh well, there are a lot of
Их
them.
прям много.
Maybe I missed some.
Возможно,
There were
какие-то
still previous
пропустил, еще
questions, but
предыдущие
already the
вопросы
stream
остались,
turned
а
out to
может
be
и
long
так
again.
стрим как бы длинный получился снова.
So let's finish it now.
Поэтому давайте его сейчас закончим.
And the questions from the chat
А
and,
вопросы из
well,
чата
those that
и,
remained from the stream,
ну, те,
I will
которые
remember
остались
accordingly,
из
and then next
стрима,
time I will
я,
answer.
соответственно, запомню и потом в следующий раз отвечу.
And next time, it
А
will
в
be
следующий
about
раз
T.
будет,
Arver,
соответственно,
respectively,
про
and about why the model
и
is
про
exactly
то,
like
почему
this,
модель
and
именно
whether we are missing
такая,
something
и
by using such a
не
model.
упускаем ли мы чего-то, пользуясь такой моделью.
Well, in general, everything
Ну, в
is with
общем,
graphs.
всё такое
I've
с
already drawn the
графиками.
graph.
Графики я уже нарисовал.
Generally great.
Вообще отлично.
So here then,
Так
let me
что
take my
вот,
leave for today.
позвольте тогда на сегодня откланяться.
People ask me what I drink.
Люди спрашивают, что я пью.
This is Schweppes.
Это Швепс.
Anyway, in
Ну,
general,
как бы то ни
let
было,
me take my leave for
позвольте
today.
на сегодня откланяться.
Questions will not sink into
Вопросы
oblivion,
не канут в лету.
and the ones that were
И
asked
те,
earlier,
которые
I
ранее
collected them
задали,
from all
со
the
всех
sites,
площадок
threw out
я
only
их
the most
собирал,
idiotic ones.
выкидывал только самые идиотские.
Vaughn, I'm going to
Ну,
answer the
сейчас
last one
последний
now.
отвечу.
He was a little bit in a
Он
top.
был чуть-чуть
What
off topic,
incentives to
но
the
какие
counter
стимулы
economy
в
will
рекламной
replace
экономике
competition
заменят
between companies
конкуренцию
to
между
stimulate the
компаниями
modernization of
для
production?
стимулирования
The thing is that in
модернизации
most
производства?
cases,
В том, что
in the
в
vast
большинстве
majority of
случаев,
cases, the
подавляющем
economic
большинстве
incentive
случаев
does not work
экономический
here,
стимул
because
не
modernization of
работает.
production is a very risky
Потому что
process, and most people postpone modernization to the last.
модернизация
In all
производства это
countries
очень
of the world,
рискованный
not
процесс.
only in Russia.
Большинство людей до последнего откладывает модернизацию. Во всех странах мира, не только в
And it's
России.
cool how it
А
works,
клёво
because
оно так
people have an
работает, потому
economic
что у людей
motivation
есть
outside.
неэкономическая
In other
мотивация.
words, there
То
are a
есть
lot of
есть куча
people
людей,
who are
которым
interested
интересно
in
вот
bringing
это
this matter to
дело
life.
воплотить
There
в
are
жизнь.
employees,
Это
and there
бывают
are owners
сотрудники,
themselves.
бывают сами
When one
владельцы.
meets the other,
Когда
they get
встречаются
innovative
одни с
production.
другими, у них получается инновационное
In other
производство.
words, employees want to do
Сотрудники
this
хотят этим
because they are
заниматься, потому
interested
что
in
им
it.
это
An
интересно.
entrepreneur wants to do it because he
Предприниматель
is
хочет этим
interested in it.
заниматься, потому
And
что
then
ему это
everything else is
интересно,
in
а
material
потом еще
gain
все
if he is
материально
lucky.
выигрыш,
And if you're
если
not
повезет.
lucky,
А если
but
не
at least
повезет,
it
то
wasn't
хотя
so
бы было не
offensive
так обидно,
because they
потому
were
что
doing interesting
занимались
things.
интересом.
So, there is just
Так
no need
что
to think
тут
about
как
the
раз
fact that
не
with the
надо думать
development of the
про то, что в
economy,
рекламной
competition will be
экономике
replaced.
заменит
It does not
конкуренцию.
need to be
Её не надо
replaced
заменять,
because
потому
it
что
does
она
not motivate.
мотивирует.
With the economic plan,
Рекламную
with a good
экономику при
scenario,
хорошем
it's
раскладе
just that this
просто
main
вот этот
motivator will
главный
become even
мотиватором
stronger
станет еще
because people as
более
a whole
сильным.
will be
Потому
more
что людям в
comfortable,
целом будет
more evenly
комфортнее, более
distributed,
равномерное
more comfortable
распределение,
psychological conditions,
более
less economic
аппетитливо.
risks. And this all prevents people from doing what they would do anyway. As soon as we remove this main motivator begins to work even better.
Людям тем, чем они занимались бы и так. Как только мы это убираем, этот главный мотиватор начинает работать еще лучше.
The successes of foreign engineering, scientific, do they occur at any sweatshops?
Они происходят на каких-нибудь патагонках.
No. They occur mainly in very prosperous communities like academic towns in Russia, in the Soviet Union, right? It is called by them as a rule, not academic towns of the university, but in the sense of it is. And their people live in greenhouse conditions, everything is nearby, a good environment, there is more or less decent housing, decent salaries, good material supply, do not think about anything at all. If we look at the Big Bang Theory, here's a look at what people are worried about there, working as scientists. For them, it's just a mega tragedy. I wanted money for the installation, but they didn't give me, that bastard of hers. But they have no worries about the fact that he is going to spend the night under the fence now. Yes, there are no worries about the fact that he eats tasteless food, that is, everything he wants. And they don't want very much. Yes, that is, it is easily achievable. He's got it, right, and what he needs for work, and what he needs for entertainment. That's where breakthroughs happen. In sweatshops, they never happen, where there are trying to survive the last of the employees, ostensibly to beat the competition, it does not work. Well, anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. Is it possible to set timings? Put it down. People send me timings. I put them down, but it's clear to me. There are 4 hours to watch, and mark up every minute, but somehow not very much. All right, everyone, dear comrades, see you again. I hope that in the near future, we will organize a stream with a friend from the Direct Democracy Party, and in the near future, there will be another part about the Turver and the model.
В ближайшее время будет еще следующая часть про Тервер и модель.
That's it. See you soon.
Все, до новых встреч.